Chapter 1035. There was a black ocean rippling in the extreme darkness and nothingness. The ocean was endless and it kept extending in the endless space. There was no light in the black ocean. The sword energy, which was powerful enough to tear everything apart, gathered into huge waves that could break stars. The indescribable sword energy roared up and down in the void, drowning everything. This should have been a terrifying scene beyond everyone's imagination. But because the black ocean was too big, in the ocean that was measured in light years, even the huge waves that could break stars looked like tiny waves in the ocean. The sword energy filled the void, sweeping away the stars. The planets and stars that originally existed around were all smashed by the sword energy. The black ocean roared and surged, occupying the entire galaxy, like an extremely deep shadow in the starry sky. The silence seemed to be eternal, unchanging. Meaningless time flowed at different speeds. The vast ocean that occupied the entire galaxy was calm and tranquil. 10,000 years had passed on the other side of the ocean, but only one day had passed on this side of the ocean. The surging ocean seemed to be completely still in the endless void. Until a glimmer of light suddenly lit up. The faint light showed that it was shining from a huge wave that was hundreds of thousands of meters high, and then it spread quickly in the surrounding sea at the speed of light. It was like a blink of an eye but also like a long time. The faint light directly covered the entire sea. The constantly undulating huge waves of sword energy slightly stopped. The black ocean instantly became a flat mirror surface. A picture appeared on the sea level. All kinds of huge objects were placed in a disorderly manner, forming a three-dimensional space. A soft but infinitely large sofa. An exaggerated bed that looked like a canopy. A beautiful woman, a harmless fat man, and His Majesty with his eyes closed. The whole picture spanned across the length of light years, and it was all imprinted on the sea. If this picture kept shrinking and looked at according to the scale of a normal person, it would be the picture of the master bedroom of Emperor Dong's palace. The sea was motionless, playing silently. A real water light surged out of the crystal bottle, completely drowning the silent figure lying on the bed. At that moment, an incomparably illusory but extremely ear-piercing whistling sound rang out in the distant void. Without any warning, a void storm appeared at the end of the sea. All sorts of chaotic cosmic rays instantly lit up the void. There was no disguise in the most real and most illusory universe. The whole world was changing. The huge and calm sea reflected Li Tianlan and the surrounding starry sky. Time seemed to be speeding up endlessly. The storm ravaged the stars. A star that was nearing the end of its life suddenly exploded and began to transform into a supernova. A good black hole that was close to the star system began to accelerate and collide with it. The void was gradually shattering, becoming weaker and weaker. The entire world was shaking and more void storms appeared. Countless storms rushed towards the sea of sword chi. However, before they could even get close, they were completely shattered by the sword chi in the void. A speck of thick darkness suddenly appeared in the void. The darkness was similar to the black ocean, but it was also different. It was the same sword energy that kept spreading. The sword chi shuttled over from different constellations and galaxies, shattering the raging storms and gradually approaching the black ocean. The ocean surged slightly for a moment. The boundless black sword chi did not merge with the ocean. Instead, it floated upwards and finally stopped above the ocean. It was like a pitch-black vault of heaven. The vault of heaven and the sea were facing each other in the void. The sky was spreading unscrupulously. A hazy and illusory figure that seemed to be about to dissipate at any time spread down silently along the black sword energy in the sky. His voice was steady and calm. "How is it?" "It has begun." The huge waves on the sea rose against the sky. The figure of War God appeared beside the transparent shadow. The two stood side by side, looking at the reflection of Li Tianlan on the sea below. The War God of the War God realm. The human emperor of the human emperor palace. Ever since they left Miracle City in the millions of years that they had experienced in the void, the two of them had been watching over each other, advancing and retreating together, exploring the end of this world step by step, the galaxies, the star fields, the entire sea of stars, and finally standing at the peak of the starry sky. The human emperor was the guardian of the war god realm. The war god was also the guardian of the human emperor palace. This relationship had lasted for countless years, and there was no possibility of it being destroyed. "How are you doing?" The war god looked up at the sky above his head and suddenly asked. Not very good. The shadow of the human emperor sprinkled a little hazy light. He looked down at Li Tianlan on the sea and his voice was solemn and solemn. I hope there will be a turn for the better this time. Go to the eternal furnace again. The war god frowned. We entered the eternal furnace together and came out alive. That's why we are where we are today. If we go again now it won't work. The human emperor sighed softly and his eyes were fixed on the sea. He saw the endless water light wrapped around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body floated up from the bed and began to emit clear light. The rich clear light almost ignored all the distance in an instant and directly rushed out of Miracle City. In the blink of an eye, the light penetrated the black sea, penetrated the black sky and covered the entire sea of stars. The endless void storm became countless times stronger in an instant. There were disasters everywhere. The starry sky seemed to have a consciousness and was trying its best to search for something, or even to reverse something. The war god waved his hand. The reflection of Li Tianlan was instantly pulled away farther and farther. In just a second the bedroom was pulled away and turned into a blue planet. The void around the planet was changing little by little in a way that was so weak that it was almost imperceptible. The sunlight began to refract. As if a switch had been activated, everything that followed would enter an irreversible process. It has taken root. The war god said in a low voice. He still chose Miracle City. The war is about to begin. The human emperor's voice was a bit complicated. On the left is the light of order and on the right is the shadow of chaos. The reason we can struggle to survive is related to the authority. But just like the battle when you killed the Doomsday, what do you think? It was luck. The war god was silent for a long time before he shook his head. From the moment he killed Doomsday until now. It was the first time they met and the first time they talked about this topic. He had indeed relied on his own strength to kill an apocalypse from the Order faction. It was partly due to his strength but it was also due to luck. The neutral faction is at a complete disadvantage against Order. Compared to Chaos, Order can be said to be our natural enemy. We, the space-time corridor and all the living beings of the neutral faction are able to exist until now not only because of our authority. Truth is our strongest weapon. The one known as the strongest of the neutral camp in the time corridor is also the only one who can kill the Doomsday unscathed. His strength is not because of the authority but also because of the truth. The human emperor looked at Li Tianlan on the sea and said softly, "This one is close to the pure truth. He has now begun to take root in Miracle City and even affected us here. I'm afraid the time corridor has already been turned upside down. Everything in the past is deep enough. Whether it is the Order or the Chaos, they don't want to see him return. Everyone will be involved in the fire of war. Under the fire of war, how can there be a paradise? There has never been one." The war god shook his head. Time corridor. Time corridor. The human emperor murmured and suddenly asked, "If you and I join hands, will we be able to defeat His Majesty in the time corridor?" After a pause he added, "A battle of life and death." The war god was silent for a long time. The most likely outcome, he seemed to have calculated many times before he slowly said, "If you and I die, he will be seriously injured. Maybe he will lose more than half of his authority and the real brand." How terrifying, the number one expert. The human emperor's voice was a bit erratic. In this way the time corridor still has a chance to win this war. At least it can protect Miracle City and drag the war until His Majesty returns. It depends on how determined the Order and the Chaos are. And one thing is undeniable, we don't have enough time. So even if we join hands, we won't be able to defeat His Majesty in the time corridor. But as the one in Miracle City returns, the strength of His Majesty will continue to decline. After all, at the very beginning the one in Miracle City gave his authority to the one in Time Corridor. So that His Majesty can really make up for the shortcomings of Time Corridor and become the so-called master. If he returns, the faster he recovers, the greater the pressure on Time Corridor. In terms of authority, the one in Miracle City should have the highest authority, right? This question is meaningless. God of War shook his head. Your authority is higher than mine, but what's the difference in combat strength? Now it's most likely that the space-time corridor and Li Tianlan will exchange authorities to touch different paths. This is the most beneficial and convenient way. If you and I die, we can also exchange authorities if there's a chance. Human Emperor nodded thoughtfully. I should go to Time Corridor here. God of War hesitated for a moment. They weren't exactly friends with the space-time corridor. The starry sky was so vast the so-called friend was actually a meaningless word. Time Corridor, Emperor Palace, God of War Realm, etc. In this lonely but never lonely starry sky, they were on the same side and could only struggle to survive. Time Corridor encountered a battle. When fighting, God of War had to help. In the face of life and death, all grudges had to be put aside. Kill another doomsday? Human Emperor laughed. Maybe. God of War's voice was a bit erratic. The doomsday of order. No matter which one, they represented the peak and limit of combat strength in the starry sky, almost impossible to surpass. Kill another one. God of War thought silently and didn't speak. I will move Emperor Palace and God of War Realm. Leave this place to me. Human Emperor said calmly. Although it's not appropriate for me to take action now, it's not impossible if it's really necessary. Nothing will happen here. God of War turned his head and took a deep look at him. The two of them didn't say anything else. They lowered their heads and looked at the reflection on the surface of the sea. The water light with a sense of reality had completely wrapped Li Tianlan's figure. Great rivers, lakes and seas, the water light was endless, entwining Li Tianlan layer by layer, seeping through his skin into his every pore, repairing every wound in his body and even every cell. Extremely weak changes were happening little by little. In their line of sight, they could clearly see that Li Tianlan's body was growing taller little by little, and his eyebrows and eyes were becoming sharper and sharper. This change was so subtle that it was impossible to notice, but in their line of sight, this change was extremely clear and intense. Endless disasters in the starry sky kept happening with Li Tianlan's changes, becoming more and more frequent and violent. The smell of divine weapons. Human Emperor suddenly said. God of War nodded and said, they are indeed exchanging authorities. If we fail this time we can also try. They are forerunners and we still have some time to wait for the results. Forerunners, God of War muttered to himself, they always have been. Human Emperor smiled gently. 11 will go to Miracle City this time. This is the condition I negotiated with the space-time corridor. You are his grandfather, do you need to ask him to take care of your family? God of War suddenly asked. 11 was his youngest son, the 11th Prince of God of War Realm. His real name was Lin Shi. What's the point? Human Emperor asked. At least it will make you feel better. God of War said lightly. I don't feel uncomfortable. Human Emperor shook his head, and there are some things I still remember. God of War was slightly stunned. Tianzong seems to be good? This generation, Human Emperor shook his head slightly. The two brothers are good, but they have no martial arts in their eyes, so there is no need to deliberately take care of them. In any case, the Wang family of Beihai will always exist. Possible we can bring Xianxia here. Haoyan and he can. As for Xianxia, Lingxi likes it very much. Ren Huang said calmly. It was obvious that he was starting to talk about his daily life. What about Yuetong? That's not for me to decide. God of War suddenly laughed. If we go back to the beginning, Yuetong seems to be Qin Weibai's maid, right? At the beginning she was entangled with Li Tianlan, and later she was driven out by Qin Weibai. At that time the person who had the best relationship with Yuetong was the mother of the 9th prince in the space-time corridor. You were chased out just because you spoke up for the injustice. Is that true? Human Emperor turned his head and looked helplessly at his close friend who had gone through thick and thin with him for countless years. The so-called relationship was indeed a bit messy. To some extent, God of War could be regarded as his nephew, and from another point of view, God of War could be regarded as his son-in-law. But after so many years, who was who and who was who? What was the relationship between who and who? He shook his head. Are you telling me a story here? I seem to have received some news, but it was very vague. How can you say it clearly? Human Emperor said quietly. What you said is true, but it should be Dongqing Rushi, not Yuetong. There is also a saying that Yuetong and Qin Weibai are the same person, or Dongqing Rushi and Wang Yuetong are both Qin Weibai's disciples. Simes, who is who? How can you say it clearly? We are all lonely souls and wild ghosts, not to mention others, just us. He paused and said softly, do we really know who we are? God of War was silent. A trace of sadness flashed across his extremely bright eyes. Li Tianlan is Li Tianlan. Even if he returns, he is still Li Tianlan. At the beginning of the research, maybe it was a trap. Human Emperor said slowly. God of War seemed to lose the nature of chatting all of a sudden. He looked down at the Black Sea quietly. After a long time he said slowly, I am me. Human Emperor said yes. Go. God of War suddenly said, go to the space-time corridor. Human Emperor's illusory figure, which seemed to dissipate at any time, disappeared silently and returned to the dark sky. On the Black Sea, Li Tianlan's fingers moved slightly and he raised his palm. God of War took a deep look at the scene on the sea. In the next moment the calm sea surface suddenly shattered. Endless raging waves of sword energy rose and fell. The whole sea was spinning violently. Waves after waves that could break stars roared and surged crazily. The illusory but extremely strong space wall was torn apart in an instant. God of War's figure disappeared. The entire Black Ocean began to move. Endless black sword energy rushed along the broken space wall to the starry sky at the other end. Who is who? Who am I? This might be the question that troubled every peak expert. After such a long time, God of War was not sure whether he was Lin Xianyuan or not. But the most essential thing would never change. Right now he was this sea of sword chi that occupied the entire galaxy. This was his most essential form of existence. The surging and mighty sword energy poured into the other end of the broken void. It was like going through a wormhole. The first wave of sword energy that passed through the temporary void passage rushed out. No one knew how many years had passed in the space-time corridor. Countless ear-piercing alarms sounded at the same time. At the very front of the Black Sea. It came from all directions. There was a cold metallic luster everywhere. The void had already disappeared. The sea was surging and the sword energy was overwhelming. The metallic luster had completely covered the void and the stars. In an extremely distant corner, multi-barreled planetary obliteration rapid-fire cannons were firing crazily. Billions of densely packed mechanical armies filled the starry sky. Countless high-tech lights crisscrossed. Further away there were many spinning wormholes and countless mechanical lifeforms were gushing out of them. More and more mechanical lifeforms were gushing out. The endless attacks received the order to attack the moment the Black Sea appeared. The overwhelming light instantly collided with the black tide. Although the starry sky was lonely, it was never lonely. For survival, war was the eternal theme. Perhaps no one knew the meaning of survival. Or perhaps, survival itself was a unique meaning. The boiling sword energy madly stirred the mechanical creatures in all directions. The cold metal kept shattering. The overwhelming parts gradually formed an incomparably huge figure in the distance. This was the end of the world. The essence of the world was darkness, silence, and nothingness. The essence hid everywhere, in dreams, in the depths of consciousness, and in the most fearful place. He didn't know what he was, who he was, and why he could exist. He didn't know what he was. Countless people and countless lives were constantly overlapping in the most trance consciousness. His understanding of himself was being revised over and over again. Li Tianlan's consciousness seemed to be divided into countless personalities, building countless worlds. His consciousness existed in the darkness as well as in every different world. His self seemed to be scattered all the time, constantly scattered. There seemed to be no obstacle in the world, but there were obstacles everywhere. It was like sitting in countless dreams at the same time. Li Tianlan's consciousness was completely lost. In the darkness, there was no thinking and direction. There were only himself doing different things in one world after another. A large number of pictures appeared, sometimes blurred and sometimes clear. That was an extremely violent explosion. The extremely high temperature ignited the void in an instant. Stars, galaxies, clusters of stars and endless star areas seemed to die at the same time. The high temperature evaporated everything. The violent explosion seemed to expand wildly outward, but at the same time it collapsed inward. Nothing could stay. Civilization, the starry sky, everything was completely destroyed in the explosion and high temperature. The picture dimmed down. It dimmed down for a long, long time. In the darkness of nothingness, a light representing infinite vitality appeared and turned into a picture again. Li Tianlan seemed to have lost all perception of the outside world and just looked at it numbly. It was a barren mountain. The man and woman in rags looked at each other silently. "Brother." With endless exhaustion, the woman spoke softly. Her voice was cold and dreamy. Even in the most embarrassing state, the woman was still full of an indescribable delicacy and perfection. This was a woman without any flaws. Even the word, devastatingly beautiful, seemed to be insufficient to describe 1/10,000th of her elegance. This was also a woman Li Tianlan was very familiar with. But the moment he saw her, Li Tianlan suddenly forgot her name. Or it could be said that in the time when he didn't know whether it was real or virtual, she had too many names. Li Tianlan remembered everything. He couldn't remember. He didn't even know what his name was. He listened to the woman call the man in front of her brother. Li Tianlan forgot everything, but at this moment he could suddenly clearly feel that the equally embarrassed man was himself. "It's only us." The man looked around at the barren mountains that exuded strong vitality, his voice hoarse. "At least it's not too bad." The woman forced a smile. "Maybe, brother, it's raining. The cosmic radiation is too strong." "What is this?" "Mudman, look, this is me, this is you and my parents. But I can't remember what they look like. There are only the two of us. Are these also us?" "No, there are new friends." "Then why do they look like us?" I can't remember. It's been a long time. I only remember what we look like and forget everything." "Are you lonely?" "No, I have my brother to accompany me. But you will always be lonely." I have an idea." Say it?" "Maybe we can be husband and wife. But, I'm your sister. It's only the two of us." "This is Xian and this is Su. There are 4 people in the Imperial Palace now. I don't like them anymore." I chased Xian and Su out." Are you unhappy?" "No, it's just that there are only the 2 of us in the Imperial Palace again." "Flood. So troublesome, they are all troublesome. Why war? These stones are very interesting. This is real beyond the limit. It's beautiful, I like it very much, unfortunately. My name is Xianyuan. I will leave this place eventually." "Where to?" "To explore the world's ultimate." "Will you take me with you?" "Together." Together." "Greetings, Your Majesty." "We failed? This trip was not in vain, this life was not in vain. What did Your Majesty see?" "A bunch of random things. Born from nothingness, guarding nothingness. Poor species. That's their only instinct. They can't tolerate us. I call them order. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. What is that? Kneeling to God. Why should we kneel to other species when we are born as humans? What is God? The world has a master, but the so-called God, what is it? I am the human emperor standing shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth, with ghosts and gods. The human race should have its own persistence. If I die, you will be the human race's general trend. If I return, I will be the divine weapon. Your Majesty, is this your new imperial palace? No, from today onwards our territory will be called the Time Corridor. Why is it called the Time Corridor? You will understand. In the future. Your Majesty, I am Xianyuan Wushang, Su's son. Yes, Your Majesty, that's not what you used to call me. That was before, it's also now. Just call me big brother like before. But you are my father's, that's the real past, or should I say him? Am I or am I not? I'm not sure myself, but you are my brother. Our people have been polluted. Everyone's thoughts have been changed in an instant. The war has begun. Leave here. Under the starry sky there are no more human emperors. I will pass on the throne to Xianyuan. He has failed. Countless voices reverberated in the air. Blurry images kept flashing. Battleships crisscrossing the starry sky, dense mechanical creations, twisted and chaotic souls, overwhelming elements and holy light. Li Tianlan didn't think. He accepted the information numbly, but instinctively felt that something was wrong. Everything he had seen and heard seemed to be unreal. It was like a real dream. It didn't seem real at all. A large number of images began to vanish the moment he realized that they were fake. The darkness surged slightly. Li Tianlan moved forward subconsciously. He didn't know where his body was. He just wanted to move forward in the direction of the darkness. In his consciousness, there was a feedback that the darkness was retreating. His numb consciousness began to become active again. His consciousness floated up and drifted into the heavy darkness. There was a touch of pale white in the darkness. The surroundings seemed to be getting colder and colder. The darkness gradually thinned. The whiteness became purer. Li Tianlan floated forward silently for a long time. Without any warning, the boundless darkness suddenly dissipated. The pale white light became extremely dazzling in an instant. It was like snow all over the world. The static wind and snow suddenly became frantic the moment he appeared. In the messy wind and snow, there was an incomparably real, bright and shining sword light. The moment Li Tianlan saw the sword light, it had already arrived in front of him. Forward. An incomparably resolute, desperate sword. The sword edge seemed to carry the coldness of the ice and snow all over the sky. It penetrated his chest and pierced his heart. The sword energy was surging and blood was flying. All his consciousness froze in an instant. In Li Tianlan's sight, there was only a pair of eyes that were extremely desperate and a little confused. The pair of eyes looked at him quietly and said softly, "I'm sorry." The snow turned into water. The sound of water filled the sky. Li Tianlan abruptly opened his eyes and sat up in bed. All the wars, all the dreams and all the chaos seemed to be far away from him in an instant. The pure reality was completely awakened. At the same time, in the vast and endless star zone, the sky was filled with the flames of war. The fierce void storm, the burning and exploding stars, the cosmic rays flying everywhere, and all the cosmic disasters suddenly subsided the moment Li Tianlan opened his eyes. In each star zone, countless battlefields paused at the same time. In the next second, the legions of the space-time corridor, countless artificial creations, a large number of generals, dozens of dukes and several princes knelt on the ground almost at the same time. Their voices with infinite power rang out from countless battlefields under the starry sky. "Welcome back, Your Majesty." The black ocean surged up and down. The sword light all over the Star River instantly rolled up countless wild waves. The sword energy of the god of war, which was fighting with the doomsday, suddenly became extremely crazy. The black sky of the Emperor Palace gradually gathered into the figure of a middle-aged man. Facing the direction of Miracle City, he bowed slightly with a complicated look in his eyes and remained silent. Golden light shone in the Pinnacle Palace. An extremely dazzling golden beam of light suddenly rushed out of the black hole where the Pinnacle Palace was, spreading to the surrounding star zone at a speed far faster than the speed of light. The golden light crisscrossed. On countless battlefields, everyone in the space-time corridor saw the constantly twisting golden light. The golden light spread all over the void, forming a word that everyone could see clearly. Fight to the death. For a long time, this was the first time that His Majesty of the space-time corridor made a move. His brush falls on the Star River. This was the most powerful human emperor's decree of the human clan today. It was also the decree of the human emperor. In Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan shook his head hard, feeling a little lost. His consciousness seemed to still be stuck in that eternal darkness, at that final stab into his heart, at that pair of incomparably despairing and deathly still eyes. He sat quietly and kept silent for a long time. The endless water light slowly disappeared. Xianyuan Wushang put away the crystal bottle in his hand and smiled. "It's good that you're awake." After a pause, he continued, "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Tianlan. Qin Weibai walked quickly to Li Tianlan, hugged his shoulder and touched his head subconsciously. She whispered, "It's okay, it's okay." Li Tianlan quietly looked into Qin Weibai's eyes. His eyes were a little strange. "What's wrong?" Qin Weibai was a little confused. "It's okay." Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. All the pictures and conversations he saw in his sleep were dissipating at an unprecedented speed, becoming more and more blurred. But the last pair of eyes he saw became clearer and clearer. That was Qin Weibai's eyes. They were exactly the same as Qin Weibai's eyes, but they were not like her eyes at all. "I had a dream." Li Tianlan hugged Qin Weibai tightly and whispered, "I dreamed that you killed me." Chapter 1036. Qin Weibai's body obviously stiffened for a moment. She moved in Li Tianlan's arms, but Li Tianlan's palm was too strong for her to break free. She could only subconsciously look away and murmur, "What are you talking about? It's just a dream." Li Tianlan shook his head. He was a little confused, but his mind was surprisingly clear. It was a completely indescribable feeling. Li Tianlan had never even felt such a state. Rational, clear and sharp. Not only his mind but even his body was extremely sensitive. His body trembled slightly and he instinctively moved his muscles. He said slowly, "And it seems, I also dreamed that you were my sister. It was a little messy and there was a war." Qin Weibai's face turned slightly red. She seemed to think of something and quietly glared at Li Tianlan, thinking that he was flirting with her. Li Tianlan said slowly and his brows gradually furrowed. He tried hard to recall what he saw in the dream. Countless pictures, countless voices, countless countries and the same supreme figure. The extremely clear pictures began to dissipate quickly the moment he woke up. Li Tianlan instinctively wanted to pursue something, but the more he tried to recall, the faster the pictures in his mind disappeared. He fell silent. All the pictures disappeared. Only Qin Weibai's desperate and confused eyes in the dream were left. Li Tianlan's brows furrowed more tightly. He suddenly felt a little irritable and became more silent. "Tianlan, how do you feel now? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? You were seriously injured when you first came back. Now we can do a further detailed examination." Qin Weibai reached out and smoothed Li Tianlan's frowning brows. Her voice was gentle. "I'm fine. I'm just a little hungry," Li Tianlan said subconsciously. At his level of martial arts he had a very precise understanding of his own body. He could even feel the flow of his blood, the changes of his muscles and bones every time he exerted force. Only by making precise use of his body could he exert the most powerful combat power. He was now convinced that there was nothing wrong with his body. He was just a little hungry, very hungry, very hungry. Li Tianlan suddenly froze and raised his head to look around. All his consciousness finally became completely clear. "Is this in Tianan?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and asked. He did not know how long he had been in a coma. Although the images in his coma gradually faded and disappeared, the sense of confusion that seemed to cross countless years did not disappear. It was not until Qin Weibai mentioned his injury that he remembered something. After leaving Mount Dibing, Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuang to launch the most fatal sneak attack on him at the most impossible time. Although he had recovered from his injury, his physical strength had been exhausted, and he could not make a conventional counterattack at all. At that moment he used the last bit of Wu Qing's energy to try to reincarnate the sword qi he had sensed in the sky earlier. Even he wasn't sure if it was sword qi. That kind of perception was too vague and Li Tianlan was not sure. But in that situation, it was the only way for him to fight back. Li Tianlan didn't think there was any power he couldn't control. He had considered the possibility that he would be heavily injured, but he had never thought that the moment the sword qi appeared in his hand, his body would be unable to withstand the absolute burden and completely collapse. Thoroughly. Yes, it was the most thorough collapse. The moment the sword qi appeared, Li Tianlan couldn't see what was happening in front of him. He vaguely remembered that his body had suffered the strongest tearing at the same time the sword qi appeared. His body collapsed and his consciousness blurred. When he opened his eyes he was already in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's fingers moved. A subtle but extremely sharp sword qi appeared at his fingertips. The vague sword qi twisted wildly at an unimaginable speed. At this moment, Li Tianlan only needed to snap his fingers, and the entire Emperor Dong's palace would be completely shattered by this subtle sword qi. Once again Li Tianlan confirmed his status. Now he was undoubtedly in the peak state. To be exact, he was even better than his previous strongest state. What had happened since he was in a coma? Li Tianlan was silent for a while and suddenly asked, "How long have I been in a coma?" Qin Weibai was silent and looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look in her eyes. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered, "Has it been a long time?" Qin Weibai took her mobile phone and clicked on the call record. The call at the top of the call record was to Naylan Shuying, which showed that the time was 25 minutes ago. The second call was between her and Li Tianlan, 3 minutes and 3 minutes ago. 33 minutes. Li Tianlan was stunned for a while and raised his head. "I was in a coma for half an hour?" "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded. "And this half an hour also included the time when Naylan examined your body and recorded your physical data. Less than 2 minutes after we ended the call, you appeared in Emperor Dong's palace." Qin Weibai's tone became more and more confused. When she first saw Li Tianlan's injury she couldn't care about anything else. But now that she thought about it again she found that there was something wrong everywhere. The most incredible part was the journey from Beihai to Tianan. At that time Xianyuan Wushang was in East Island, and Li Tianlan was in Beihai. But when Li Tianlan was seriously injured, it was Xianyuan Wushang who took him back to Tianan. A few minutes. The so-called few minutes were the time after Xianyuan Wushang put Li Tianlan in the bedroom and found Qin Weibai. That was to say, in that very short time Xianyuan Wushang went from East Island to Beihai, and then from the northernmost tip of Zhongzhou State to the southernmost tip of Zhongzhou State to Tianan. What kind of speed was that? It was not even a matter of speed but something impossible. But the so-called impossible had happened just like that. The more Qin Weibai thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. It was hard for her to describe her inner feelings. Xianyuan Wushang's behavior showed that he was not hostile to Emperor Dong's palace, but had great kindness. But after everything went out of control, Qin Weibai's inner uneasiness gradually became clear. This is Xianyuan Wushang. Qin Weibai said softly. He brought you here. Maybe only he knows the answer to many things. Li Tianlan was stunned and turned his head subconsciously. The harmless fat man in his sight suddenly became clear. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. This was his bedroom. If it weren't for Qin Weibai's reminder, he wouldn't even notice that there was a person standing next to him. Xianyuan Wushang frowned tightly and looked a little hesitant. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the fat man in front of him. He didn't feel any aura from Xianyuan Wushang. Was any aura? This was undoubtedly a completely different feeling from Qin Weibai. In Li Tianlan's perception, Xianyuan Wushang didn't even have the most basic aura of life. He seemed to be a shadow, not a living person at all. Are you Xianyuan Wushang? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Big brother, you don't know me? Xianyuan Wushang frowned even more, and his tone was filled with deep confusion. Have we met? Li Tianlan was a little surprised. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep look at him and said softly, I thought you had seen me when you were in a coma. When I was in a coma, Li Tianlan shook his head. I had a lot of messy dreams. That's the problem. Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly. Why did you have dreams, big brother? What do you mean? Li Tianlan looked at him and asked. You shouldn't be dreaming in your current state. Dreams are the symbol of chaos, or rather the symbol of shadow. Chaos, disorder, weirdness. You shouldn't be dreaming. Big brother, are you sure you were dreaming when you were in a coma? Xianyuan Wushang asked seriously. Li Tianlan didn't understand. He just narrowed his eyes and said flatly, I'm not sure. I've forgotten. Xianyuan Wushang stood where he was and kept silent for a long time. Li Tianlan couldn't be sure whether he was dreaming or not. Xianyuan Wushang couldn't be sure either. Some things had obviously gone awry. What on earth had Li Tianlan experienced when he was in a coma? Xianyuan Wushang wasn't qualified to know this question, but he was very clear that if Li Tianlan was really dreaming, then the problem was already very big. If I was really dreaming, what does it mean? Li Tianlan asked casually. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a long time, and then he said softly, pollution. Chapter 1037. Light the fire, stir fry, steam, cook, plate. The aroma filled the air. Yu Donglai was busy. Yu Qingyan was busy. In the small cafeteria of Emperor Dong's palace, more than a dozen chefs were busy. The steamed rice was placed in an insulated wooden bucket. One after another, dishes that looked, smelled, and tasted good were carried out like flowing water. The kitchen once again began to prepare new dishes. The small cafeteria of Emperor Dong's palace was full of the top chefs of Zhongzhou State. The chefs of major cuisines were divided into small groups. In addition, there were Western cuisines and desserts, all of which were top elites. At this time, everyone was busy with a touch of anxiety and even panic on their faces. Yu Qingyan put aside the cut beef, glanced at the oil in the pot, and skillfully fiddled with the fat fish around her. She frowned slightly and whispered, Grandpa, is there any problem? Who knows? Yu Donglai also frowned. I just went over to have a look and there seemed to be no problem. He stopped stir-frying and then shook his head. What did Sister Little Bai say? Yu Qingyan asked. She didn't say anything, so let's continue. Yu Donglai sighed. There was only one reason why the entire small cafeteria was busy. Li Tianlan was very hungry. Everyone would be hungry. At first, no one took this matter to heart. Since His Majesty was hungry, they just needed to prepare food. The Sichuan cuisine group prepared a table full of Sichuan dishes for Li Tianlan, with meat and vegetables, spicy and appetizing. Li Tianlan's time in Tianan was very short, and every chef in Emperor Dong's palace wanted to show off their skills in front of His Majesty. When the first table of food was finished in more than 10 minutes, the chefs were simply surprised. They felt that His Majesty had a big appetite, but they were not too surprised. The body of a martial arts expert needed an astonishing amount of energy, so many experts liked all kinds of high-calorie food very much. Since His Majesty still needed more, they would cook another table. The first table was quickly removed. The second table was quickly added and then removed at a faster speed. The third table. Soon everyone felt that something was wrong. Martial arts experts did have more food needs than ordinary people, but His Majesty seemed to eat a little too much. They couldn't even keep up with His Majesty's speed of destroying food. The groups of major cuisines were alarmed. Then it was Western food. In the end, even Yu Donglai, who seldom came to the kitchen, rushed over. No one had a specific count of how much Li Tianlan had eaten. Roughly speaking, Li Tianlan had eaten nearly 20 kilograms of rice and the same amount of various meats in less than 3 hours. Obviously, Li Tianlan was still hungry. Thus the kitchen was still busy. The food and drinks were consumed quickly. The dishes were brought down and served again. All the major cuisines appeared one after another. Li Tianlan did not refuse anyone. His table manners were not disheveled and could even be said to be gentle and quiet. The only thing that stood out was the speed at which he ate. Li Tianlan ate very fast, but he didn't make any sound from beginning to end. His stomach was like a bottomless pit. The moment he saw the food, the endless hunger seemed to swallow his reason. He kept eating and even had no time to talk. Qin Weibai had been sitting quietly beside Li Tianlan watching him eat. What Li Tianlan ate was enough to stun people, but Qin Weibai didn't mean to stop him. She already felt something was wrong, but her instinct kept reminding her that it was nothing. Xianyuan Wuxiang sat opposite Li Tianlan, smiling with a simple and honest face. His eyes were a little dazed with deep nostalgia. In his most distant memory, when he met Li Tianlan for the first time, His Majesty had said something to him that had influenced him for a long time. Appetite determines strength. This sentence had become the truth, followed by several princes and palace masters in the space-time corridor until now. The only difference was that Xianyuan Wuxiang inexplicably ate himself into a fat man, while his brothers and sisters were all graceful and dignified. He shook his head slightly and sighed. No one knew what he was thinking. What's wrong? Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at him. His mouth was full of food, but his voice was still clear. Appetite determines strength. This sentence is very suitable for you, big brother. Xianyuan Wuxiang began to flatter without hesitation. Li Tianlan ignored him and continued to eat. He was not a fool. By now he had naturally found that something was wrong. But the problem was that the feeling of hunger was still stubbornly there. Every cell in his body was thirsting for energy. It seemed that no matter how much he ate, he couldn't fill his stomach. All the food was completely digested the moment he swallowed it. Until now, hunger was not just a feeling. It always existed in Li Tianlan's body. This feeling was not only psychological but also physical. He had a lot of questions to ask Xianyuan Wuxiang, but he was really not in the mood to ask. What the hell is going on? Qin Weibai subconsciously glanced at Xianyuan Wuxiang. Xianyuan Wuxiang's background was extremely mysterious, and he claimed to be a doctor. In the whole Emperor Dong's palace, maybe only he could explain Li Tianlan's phenomenon. Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled and shook his head. It's not a big problem. It's just that your body needs energy now, and the energy provided by these foods is far from enough. The real brand in Li Tianlan's body had not recovered, but the medicine to heal him came from the God of War realm. It was mixed with some real potion, which completely stimulated the real brand in Li Tianlan's body. It was no exaggeration to say that the inside of Li Tianlan's body was changing all the time, becoming more and more perfect. The transformation of the body required a lot of energy. After the baptism of the real potion, most of the food in Miracle City could no longer provide effective energy for Li Tianlan. Of course, it was not completely ineffective, but the effect was extremely poor. Li Tianlan's body needed more and more energy. The so-called 1 kilogram of rice was equivalent to a few grains of rice for Li Tianlan. Of course, he could be full if he kept eating, but it would take time. Xianyuan Wuxiang looked down at his watch and whispered, "Soon." Qin Weibai slightly raised her eyebrows. When she was about to ask something, The roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded in the sky above Emperor Dong's palace. The helicopter had not yet landed. An extremely steady footstep had already appeared in front of the small restaurant. Xing Tian, who was extremely burly, bent down and walked in. Li Tianlan looked up at him, seeming to be a little surprised by his size. He nodded and then continued to fight with the food in front of him. Your Majesty. Xing Tian bowed deeply to Li Tianlan, and his voice was respectful and awe-inspiring. Li Tianlan hummed and said vaguely, sit down and have something to eat. Xing Tian subconsciously looked at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang made a gesture of drinking water. Xing Tian understood. He searched in his backpack and found a bottle of unlabeled purified water. Big brother, this is a special water source developed by our family. Tastes good. Try it. Xianyuan Wushang took the cup and water, poured a cup for Li Tianlan, and put it in front of him with both hands. Li Tianlan drank it without any hesitation. He really didn't know what to guard against Xianyuan Wushang. It was a very subtle intuition. From the first time he saw this fat man, Li Tianlan felt that he was very pleasing to the eye, trustworthy. And if he really wanted to harm him, he would have died many times by now. The pure water went down his throat and into his abdomen. The pure water was cold, but the moment the liquid entered his abdomen, it suddenly turned into a warm current. Majestic energy burst out of his body in an instant. With only one cup, Li Tianlan's hunger was suddenly reduced. A vast white mist gushed out of his body without warning. The white mist came out of his body in wisps, further perfecting his body. Li Tianlan closed his eyes subconsciously. His mind had never been clearer. His perception had never been sharper. His body had never been more perfect. The infinite energy eased his hunger and enriched every cell in his body. Li Tianlan could even feel every inch of his muscles cheering. The strength of his body, which had been pulling him forward, was increasing at a slow but extremely clear rate. His body had been extremely perfect before. His strength, speed, and willpower had all reached their limits. However, it was precisely because it was too perfect that it became imperfect without the support of absolute physical strength. Therefore, Li Tianlan had never entered the invincible realm. According to his normal growth rate, it would take at least 3 to 5 years for him to officially enter the invincible realm. At that time, Li Tianlan would be nearly 30 years old, which was also an absolutely shocking age compared to his realm. But now, with this cup of water, his body, which was already at a critical point, suddenly broke through some kind of barrier. Of course, this was not the work of this cup of water. This glass of water was like a primer. The potion that was mixed with the truth was the real priceless treasure. That potion. Li Tianlan's body was repaired at the deepest level. The transformation had been going on, but Li Tianlan's body always lacked enough energy. All the energy of the truth potion was used to repair Li Tianlan's injuries and stimulate his real brand, so the transformation was greatly slowed down. At this time, the bottle of pure water that Xianyuan Wushang took out came from the famous Immortal spring in the time corridor. Different from the diluted water that Xianyuan Wushang drank, this bottle was pure spring water from the Immortal spring. The incomparably majestic energy suddenly became a primer and a catalyst. The energy filled Li Tianlan's body and was absorbed by his body. The transformation was greatly accelerated. In this state, Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in the fastest time. This so-called fastest time might be a few minutes, a few hours, or a day. Li Tianlan suddenly stood up. He took a deep look at Xianyuan Wushang, nodded and said, "Excuse me." He glanced at Qin Weibai, nodded and disappeared in an instant. This is... Qin Weibai was a little surprised. Big brother is going to break through. Xianyuan Wushang laughed sincerely. Break through? Qin Weibai looked surprised. Heavenly Sun? Invincible realm. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. But Big brother, who has entered the invincible realm, can barely be called the heavenly son of this era. Barely. Qin Weibai frowned. There are still opponents. Muttering to himself, Li Tianlan looked at the sky outside the window. Li Tianlan's transformation was getting faster and faster. That feeling seemed to have been connected to Miracle City and formed a very special signal. Xianyuan Wushang could feel this signal. So could the War God realm. Xianyuan Wushang lowered his head and took a sip of wine. Somehow there seemed to be a crack in the world. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, "The distinguished guest is here." Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes. Xing Tian. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly said, "Go and say hello to our distinguished guest." Me? Xing Tian was obviously stunned. He knew who the so-called distinguished guest was. The youngest son that the war god valued the most. Lin Shi, the 11th prince of the war god realm. There was no so-called crown prince in places like the Time Corridor, the Emperor Palace and the war god realm. Lin Shi was basically the most important prince in the war god realm. Let him go and say hello and give him a show of strength. It was not that Xing Tian was afraid, but he really felt that he was not important enough. Don't worry. Xianyuan Wushang sneered and said, "Big brother is here, he dare not do anything to you." Xing Tian answered in a low voice, turned around and strode away without hesitation. "Who is the distinguished guest you mentioned?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked as she watched Xing Tian's figure disappear. "The uninvited guest." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head and said, "His name is Lin Shi, a calligrapher and a battle maniac. I don't like that guy very much. If everything goes well, you should see him soon, sister-in-law." Lin Shi? Qin Weibai frowned tightly. She had never heard of this name. There was no such name in the memory of her other self. "Will he be a match for Tianlong?" Qin Weibai asked. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. In terms of authority, the 11th prince of the God of War's realm was a bit higher than him, the 9th prince of the space-time corridor. Furthermore, the other party's authority was neutral, so he could directly reach the top. In terms of combat strength, Lin Shi's combat strength was higher than the current Li Tianlong's. Because of this, he had not appeared when Li Tianlong woke up. It had been a few hours since Li Tianlong woke up, but he did not know how long it had been in the war god realm. What the other side had been waiting for was undoubtedly Li Tianlong's transformation. Li Tianlong was no match for Lin Shi now, but it was hard to say after he broke through and officially entered the invincible realm. No matter how high Lin Shi's authority was, this was still the Miracle City, the real Miracle City. As long as his authority did not reach the top, he would almost never be a big threat to Li Tianlong. It was true that the war god was arrogant and strong, but no matter how arrogant he was, he did not have the guts to send a son who could crush Li Tianlong to make trouble for him. This time the war god realm was really sincere in this deal. Xianyuan Wushang thought silently and said softly, "Next, it will be very lively." Chapter 1038. Barren Mountains, Snow, Flames, Wreckage. The flying object, full of iron-blooded style and metallic texture, smashed into the top of an inaccessible snowy mountain in the European continent. The sound of the engine exploding shook the wilderness. Broken parts flew everywhere and some deformed alloys flew everywhere in the rapid shuttle. Sparks rang out in the explosion, enveloping the extremely delicate flying object. In the silence, only the fire caused by the explosion slowly burned in the snow. The cold wind howled at the top of the mountain and the snow flew everywhere. The raging flames kept burning the flying object, but it could no longer cause a second explosion. The rising temperature began to gradually extinguish, and countless parts and charred marks on the ground were quickly buried by the snow. In the silence, the metal flying object that was paralyzed on the top of the snowy mountain suddenly shook abruptly. Bang! An incomparably dull sound of impact rang out. The first sound, the second sound, and the next sound came one after another. An incomparably huge force shook the mountain, bombarding the door of the flying object persistently. Bang! The continuous bombardment lasted for a long time, and the huge and heavy alloy door was suddenly completely blown away, smashing into the snow dozens of meters away. The door left the body of the flying object and began to quickly melt in the snow, turning into a metal liquid and then quickly disappeared. Light footsteps rang out from the long passage of the flying object. A young man who seemed to be less than 30 years old appeared in front of the door, looking expressionlessly at the snowy mountain outside the window. Black clothes, black hair, a slender figure of 185 meters. The young man's appearance was not very handsome, but it could definitely be said that he was handsome. The lines of his face were extremely stiff, angular, and sharp like a knife. It seemed to be a kind of toughness and indifference that penetrated from the bones. Every move of his was full of aggression and a sense of oppression. He stood silently in front of the door, stretched out his hand and casually shook it. The accumulated snow on the mountain suddenly danced wildly in the air, and the cold air within a radius of several miles quickly condensed. There was no snow on the ground, but there was no mud either. The entire snow-capped mountain turned into a crystal-clear iceberg in an instant. The young man slowly walked out of the door and stepped on the hard ice. His expression became colder and colder, and the light in his pupils flowed, shining brightly. His pupils could be said to be his most attractive feature. The young man's eyes were deep and serene. What was different was that each of his eyes had two pupils. He was born with double pupils. It wasn't the kind of double pupils that took up almost all of the whites of the eyes. The pupils in the young man's eyes were slightly smaller than those of ordinary people, but the two pupils in each eye were connected, exquisite, mysterious, and beautiful. His appearance was extremely firm and cold, but his pair of extremely deep double pupils gave him an inexplicable and demonic aura. As he stood on the ice, everything around him was clearly reflected in his eyes. The young man was followed by a middle-aged man and a woman. Both of them looked ordinary, but their auras were exactly the same as the young man. They were expressionless and had incomparably cold faces. Perhaps it was a little pretentious. However, the three of them kept a straight face. They were as cold and indifferent as one could imagine, and as sinister as one could imagine. No one spoke. None of them could open their mouths. In silence, the three of them slowly moved forward, following the path under their feet down the mountain. The middle-aged man behind the young man turned around and waved at the flying object behind him. The scrapped flying object instantly became illusory, and then dissolved at a speed visible to the naked eye. The flying object disintegrated without a sound or trace. The three of them who had been silent walked forward also silently. The atmosphere was silent and cold. Lin Shi. An incomparably tranquil voice suddenly rang out. Without warning. It was impossible to tell from which direction it came. This voice rang out in an incomparably stable and clear manner. It was indifferent, without the slightest hint of emotion. The three of them who had been moving forward stopped at the same time. Lin Shi, who was walking at the forefront with no expression, narrowed his eyes and looked around carefully and seriously. The snow, the ice. The world was quiet. Lin Shi. The voice sounded again, unhurried and emotionless. The corner of Lin Shi's mouth twitched, and a bitter smile and helplessness flashed across his extremely deep but demonic eyes. He resisted the urge to speak. But the middle-aged woman who had been following him was a little uneasy. She hesitated and suddenly said in a deep voice, "May I know which distinguished guest is?" She seemed to want to say something. But before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly bent down. The almost heart-wrenching sound of retching suddenly sounded. The woman suddenly bent down and vomited. But it seemed that her body was too clean, so although the sound of retching was clear, she couldn't vomit anything. Lin Shi's face was slightly pale. He who had endured to the extreme, finally collapsed after hearing the sound of retching. All the indifference and expressionless face that he had forced to maintain completely disappeared. He also bent down and vomited. Only the middle-aged man behind Lin Shi still looked around vigilantly. Lin Shi and the middle-aged woman kept retching. They hadn't eaten for a long time, so they couldn't vomit anything at all. But the more they couldn't vomit, the more uncomfortable they felt. The heart-wrenching sound of retching kept ringing, which was extremely uncomfortable to the ears. At least the expression of the middle-aged man standing behind Lin Shi became obviously a little abnormal. From the war god realm to the miracle city. This was even more difficult to accept than coming from the space-time corridor to the miracle city. This was not simply a problem of distance. There was also a series of changes in authority, suppression of authority, and the conflict between reality and illusion. The changes had already begun. From the moment they entered the solar system, all kinds of changes had been happening, and the closer they were to the miracle city, the more serious it was. The moment the spacecraft entered the atmosphere of the miracle city, it completely lost control. The authority was completely suppressed. Reality and illusion alternated. Under such circumstances, except for some special abilities, everyone would have some incomparably wrong perceptions of their own bodies. Dizziness, nausea, retching, and then a serious phenomenon of seasickness would occur. After getting off the spacecraft, Lin Shi had been adjusting his body, trying to regain control of his own body. If this was the territory of the war god realm, he wouldn't have to work so hard, and he could vomit without worrying about his image. But this was the space-time corridor. As the 11th prince of the war god realm, even if the flames of war were raging, his every move would be watched. He came here to ask for Li Tianlan's help. Anything related to Li Tianlan was the top priority in the space-time corridor. From the second he appeared here, all his actions would be seen by the higher-ups of the space-time corridor. Lin Shi really wanted to resist the dizziness and nausea. He didn't want to lose face for the war god realm at all. His slight nervousness, under the condition of confusion in his body's cognition, was completely cold and aloof. If this went on, he would probably be able to recover in an hour at most. But who would have thought that just after he took a few steps, the people of the space-time corridor would come, and not only come but also greet him. Lin Shi really didn't want to speak, didn't want to break the rules, but as soon as the female assistant behind him spoke, everything became out of control. Lin Shi bent over and held his knees, coughing constantly and vomiting to his heart's content. "For me, you are the distinguished guests." A slow and indifferent voice sounded in the midst of the retching. "You three have worked hard to come from afar." Lin Shi lowered his head. He really didn't have the strength to talk in a short time. An elegant and natural fragrance appeared in the air. Lin Shi bent over and a white dress appeared in his sight. The dress was ethereal, shimmering slightly, and a delicate fragrance lingered. As he approached, the world seemed to have a very subtle change unconsciously. Lin Shi almost regained his cognition of the body in an instant. All the retching and nausea disappeared. The delicate fragrance floated and seemed to surround the entire snow-capped peak. Lin Shi was a little embarrassed and a little dazed. He raised his head subconsciously. In his sight, the white dress was as white as snow. It was a figure emitting a hazy shimmer from head to toe. Like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. The white dress in his sight seemed extremely quiet, but also seemed to be walking all the time. She was like one person, but also like thousands of people occupying the world. In Lin Shi's eyes, there seemed to be different figures appearing in different directions, more and more, occupying his eyes, like an extremely dreamy phantom. Lin Shi couldn't see her face. The light gauze white dress, the clear light lingering, everything in front of him was in a trance. When absolute beauty reached the pinnacle, everything in sight would become an illusion. What couldn't be seen clearly and couldn't be remembered was always the most beautiful. Wave-treading microsteps, her socks stirred up dust. She stood there quietly, her eyes as clear as water as she looked at the three distinguished guests from the war god realm. However, in the eyes of the three of them, it was as if there were countless white robes fluttering in the wind, like fairies flying in the sky. Lin Shi's breathing even disappeared. He stood there in a daze, and there was only one sentence left in his mind. Like a light cloud covering the moon, swaying like the snow in the flowing wind. No words could describe the breathtaking moment at this moment. The extreme beauty was like an illusory and ethereal dream, infinite joy and infinite disappointment. In the hazy light, the woman in white frowned slightly and said softly, "Presumptuous." Her voice was as ethereal as fog, but it was as shocking as thunder. Lin Shi's face suddenly became pale. He suddenly closed his eyes, and two dazzling lines of blood flowed directly from his pupils. "Your Highness." The middle-aged woman behind Lin Shi was suddenly shocked and subconsciously supported him. Hurriedly glancing back, she suddenly found that not only Lin Shi, but her other colleague was also in an extremely embarrassing state. The woman's arm trembled and her heart suddenly sank. No one knew their strength better than the three of them. Lin Shi was the most valued prince of the war god realm. If there was a so-called prince of the war god realm, this position would definitely be Lin Shi's. The reason why he was valued was not only because of his resemblance to the war god, but more importantly because of his talent and the strength that had realized part of his talent and potential over the years. No matter where Lin Shi was, he was not weak. And the two of them could become Lin Shi's assistants this time, so they were not weak either. But now, she subconsciously glanced at the white dress opposite her. The white dress became quiet again, just standing there silently. None of the three people in the war god realm could determine where she was. They couldn't even determine how far away she was from them, let alone determine what she was doing now. Everything they saw was an illusion. At this moment she completely deceived their perception, and even deceived their perception of the Miracle City. In their line of sight, the other party was indeed standing opposite them. But in reality the other party might have pointed the weapon at their vital points. This kind of deception, whether in the time corridor or in the war god realm, had the same name. Deception. But such a high-end deception. What was the highest authority of deception? The middle-aged woman thought about it and her face became paler. The middle-aged man behind Lin Shi barely stabilized his body, raised his hand and touched his temple. A stream of nanoparticles extended out of nothingness and quickly turned into a pair of glasses. A virtual electric current flashed across the middle-aged man's eyes. His eyes seemed to turn into electronic cigarettes in an instant. Countless signals covered the area. He carefully looked at the woman in white opposite him, and all the signals were trying to lock onto the other party's position. But in his line of sight, the other party was still standing there quietly without any change. The countless signals only returned a little bit of information, and not much information quickly appeared on his monocle. Target can't be locked on, physical constant deviation, deviation index. Detected peak energy source, data matching failed, target identity, unknown. Detected target authority, unknown. Alignment, neutral. Detected target. Target location locked, lock failed. Analyzing target's emotional fluctuations. Analysis failed. Detected. Cold sweat flowed down the middle-aged man's forehead, across the bridge of his nose, across his chin, and fell to the ground. They were all question marks. If he wasn't strong enough, this kind of detection would indeed make him speechless. But the problem wasn't his strength at all. He was the apostle of destruction. The position second only to the apocalypse. In the neutral alignment, the apostle was the peak of the human race's control. But the results of his detection were all question marks. What did this mean? The peak energy source. This description was enough to explain everything. The peak energy source on the path of deception, a woman, an incredibly beautiful woman. He really couldn't detect the other party's identity. But because he couldn't detect the other party's identity, he was able to further confirm the other party's identity. More and more cold sweat flowed down his forehead. The moment he confirmed the other party's identity, the middle-aged man only felt his scalp tingle. The middle-aged woman's expression was uncertain. Lin Shi, who steadied himself, was also a little confused. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth, took half a step forward, bowed deeply and said with great respect, "Your Highness, is your surname Feng?" Feng. Even though Lin Shi's father was the god of war, he felt like he was struck by lightning at this moment. He wondered if the way he walked out of the cabin door was too unfriendly and too pretentious, which was why he saw this person in front of him. At this moment, Lin Shi not only felt his scalp tingle, but even his hair all over his body stood up. A neutral female who dealt a heavy blow to the three of them with one sentence. A master of the space-time corridor. Feng. This identity was so clear that there wouldn't be a second one in the entire space-time corridor. Lin Shi took a deep breath and bowed slightly solemnly. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end he smiled bitterly. God of War's Lin Shi greets your highness. Princess Royal of the space-time corridor. It sounded like she was the elder sister or younger sister of the human emperor in the space-time corridor. But in fact, because it had existed for so long, the seniority in the space-time corridor had long been a mess, and it was impossible to sort it out. This had always been the case. This was something that the God of War's realm and the human emperor palace liked to complain about. But as time went by, the seniority in the God of War's realm and the human emperor palace became more and more chaotic. Except for immediate family, all seniority seemed to be constantly changing. Not to mention the other two majesties in the space-time corridor. Now one had not returned and had just touched the real stamp. But the other was already standing at the top. If one were to talk about the original relationship, the one in Miracle City was even several generations older than the majesty in the space-time corridor. But now the 9th prince of the space-time corridor could call Li Tianlong big brother. Who could explain this to? It was completely unreasonable. The same was true of the Princess Royal of the space-time corridor. She was the same generation as the majesty in the space-time corridor, but in fact they were not related by blood. The surname Feng had always stood at the top of the space-time corridor. In the space-time corridor, the Feng family was not a hereditary duke but a hereditary marquis. And it was not even an ordinary duke. It was the kind of duke with the most power. In terms of power, it was even above the king of war. The eldest son of the Feng family was called Qilin. He was the king who was on par with the human emperor in the space-time corridor. He was on par with the human emperor in the space-time corridor. How powerful was that? And the youngest sister of the Feng family, Feng Qinggu, was respected by the emperor of the human emperor palace as his own sister and was named Princess Royal. Each of the 4 magnates of the Feng family was an important figure at the peak of power. In the space-time corridor they were almost as powerful as the surname Xianyuan. However, the Feng clan had already quieted down a long time ago. Although the 4 magnates all had extremely high statuses, they refused all the positions in the space-time corridor. The Feng clan would only participate in wars. Most of the time, not to mention the war god realm, even the higher-ups of the space-time corridor rarely saw the people of the Feng clan. If it wasn't for that, the current battle king of the space-time corridor might not be the one he was now. Lin Shi felt like crying. He was the 11th prince of the god of war's realm. This was the first time he came to the space-time corridor. But the princess royal of the Feng family, whom even the princes and princesses of the space-time corridor rarely saw, was now in front of him. How great an honor was this? I'm so king unlucky. What kind of luck was this? His only impression of the eldest princess of the Feng clan seemed to be that she had once caused his mother to suffer a loss many years ago. However, just this alone was enough to make him speechless. I will follow you. The princess royal called Feng Qinggu said calmly, do what you want to do and you can pretend that I don't exist. Lin Shi's expression changed. The princess royal of the space-time corridor was following him. This was not an honor but a great pressure. He knew very well that she would not help him. She was only following him to watch some of his movements. To be exact, she was watching some of his movements when he was facing Li Tianlan. Lin Shi was in a dilemma. He could not fathom the princess royal's character. Maybe Li Tianlan did not feel much about many things, but when the princess royal was unhappy she would make him evaporate. He wanted to experience life and death, but this kind of life and death experience was of no value to him. This kind of thing was completely possible. If it were someone else, even if it were other lords of the space-time corridor here, Lin Shi would not be so flustered. But the princess royal in front of him. From the original relationship, the princess royal could be said to be the descendant of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. And she was a direct descendant. No one could say for sure whether Li Tianlan was still the original majesty. But whether he was or not, he would be another majesty of the space-time corridor. He came from the war god realm to experience some trials. In the eyes of the princess royal, maybe he was shameless and wanted to bully her father. If the princess royal really wanted to kill him, Lin Shi even suspected that he would not be able to live to see Li Tianlan. I can assure the space-time corridor that in Miracle City, I will pay attention to my behavior. Your Highness, why do you have to work so hard? Lin Shi smiled dryly. Feng Qinggu did not speak. This is against the rules. Lin Shi wanted to be tough but he really did not have the confidence. He could only say humbly, Your Highness, I hope you can understand that this is the rule of the war god realm and the space-time corridor. It is the rule of the space-time corridor, not mine. Feng Qinggu said calmly, I have my own rules. Either you go back to the war god realm immediately or you stay. I will keep an eye on you. This is a little difficult for me. Lin Shi narrowed his eyes and said softly. Difficult is difficult, so be it. Feng Qinggu said calmly. Your Highness is so arrogant, do you really not take the war god realm seriously? Lin Shi's voice was calm. I repeat, this is the deal between my father and His Majesty Xianyuan. So what? Feng Qinggu asked quietly. Lin Shi paused. In Miracle City, even if Lin Xianyuan himself comes, I will tell him to follow my rules. A cold look of anger flashed across the faces of the 3 people from the war god realm, but they could not say anything. The environment of Miracle City was extremely special. It was not that there was no such place, but it was very rare. In such an environment, everyone's strength would be suppressed to a certain extent. They knew what the reason was, but they did not know the principle behind it. A figure at the level of the war god, even if he was suppressed in Miracle City, would still have the ability to destroy the world, but here his strength would still be reduced. Feng Qinggu was different. She walked on the path of deception and she had reached the peak of it. Outside Miracle City she was far from being a match for the war god, but in Miracle City, she could use deception to gain peak combat power for a short period of time. She might not be able to defeat the war god, but it would be extremely difficult for the war god to deal with her. The path of deception was not known for its combat power. However, this path had its own uses. For a top expert like Feng Qinggu, her greatest use was on the battlefield. The bigger the battlefield, the more useful she would be. Apart from that, the greatest use of this path was civil war. The civil war of the human race. The space-time corridor could be peaceful. The War God realm and the Mortal Palace could be peaceful. Although both parties had been cooperating for a long time, local conflicts were inevitable. Not to mention the subtle relationship between both parties, even the forces under the rule of the space-time corridor had never gotten along well with each other. Wars, both internal and external, had never stopped. The War God realm really had no way to deal with a top expert like Feng Qinggu. Lin Shi's expression turned ugly. He kept silent for a long time before saying slowly, "Princess Royal, don't forget that His Majesty Li Dongqing has been in the War God realm ever since the previous failure." Feng Qinggu remained silent for a while before replying indifferently. Lin Shi took a deep look at her and nodded. "If that's the case, please go ahead, Your Highness." Clear light lingered and everything was hazy. Feng Qingwu's figure disappeared without a trace. Her last voice slowly sounded on the snow-capped peak, fading into the breeze and the dream. "I will keep an eye on you." Chapter 1039. Until Feng Qingwu's figure completely disappeared, Lin Shi and the other two elites of the War God's realm remained motionless. Behind them, the spacecraft integrated with many high-tech technologies of the War God's realm gradually became nothingness in the erosion of the surrounding environment, and the snow mountain turned into an icy peak. Lin Shi and the other two waited for a long time. There was no room for carelessness in the confrontation with the deceiver. There were too many such examples in history. Their direct combat effectiveness was indeed not outstanding, but countless details paved the way. Too many so-called big shots had failed in the hands of the deceiver. Now, although Feng Qinggu had disappeared, no one could be sure that the deceiver had deceived their vision. Feng Qinggu might actually be standing next to them. No one spoke and no one moved. In the cold wind, Lin Shi stood expressionlessly for a long time. He didn't know how long he had been standing there. Because he wasn't sure if his vision would deceive him, and he wasn't sure if his perception of time was deceiving him. "Is it necessary?" Lin Shi muttered to himself in a low voice, breaking the silence. Li Tianlan's current strength might not be considered much in the War God's realm and the time corridor, but in Miracle City he was close to the real end. The famous King Wei was also by his side, so Lin Shi naturally knew the so-called weight and propriety. Even if these were not mentioned, His Majesty in the past was worthy of everyone's respect, so Lin Shi couldn't really be unscrupulous. He came to Miracle City just to find his own opportunity, to touch the real brand on Li Tianlan and go further. It was as if he excitedly ran over to play a game with Li Tianlan, but the King Princess Royal of the Time Corridor came over with a star destroyer and pointed it at his head, constantly monitoring his every move. How nervous must Li Tianlan be to do this? Was it necessary? "Your Highness, be careful with your words," the apostle behind Lin Shi said softly. At this time, not to mention whether everything they saw was deceiving them, at least everyone heard what Her Highness said before she disappeared. "I will keep an eye on you." This also meant that from now on, their every move in Miracle City would be watched. Not to mention that they couldn't speak carelessly now, even in the future they couldn't speak carelessly. The apostle felt a little suffocated in his heart. He really had a belly full of anger with nowhere to vent it. Although there were only 3 people from the War God world, the lineup was already extremely luxurious. He was an apostle, the middle-aged woman was a holy follower, and Lin Shi was included. Any team with a weak point had thought that they could help their prince show off his skills under the eyes of the space-time corridor. However, no one had expected that they would meet the top giants of the space-time corridor as soon as they arrived at their destination. This kind of show of strength was really powerful. The corner of Lin Shi's mouth twitched. He shook his head and didn't say anything in the end. Where to now? He took a tentative step forward and his figure immediately returned to normal. For the people here, they were the real outsiders. They needed to find a starting point where to start, how to develop, and how to fight against Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Shi gave the apostle behind him a look. The apostle's eyes flashed and countless data flowed in his pupils, turning into virtual signals one after another. The virtual signals kept spreading with him as the center, invading without any hindrance. Countless information was poured into his mind at the same time. The concept of the earth took shape. All kinds of history and countless people were branded in the depths of his mind at the same time. The virtual data spread in the European continent and swept the whole world. "What?" The apostle suddenly let out a cry of surprise and then said, "Your Highness, the location of Emperor Dong's palace has been locked down." Someone has protected the database of Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Shi frowned. There was no one here who could resist the invasion of information from the apostle, or even notice it. The protection of Emperor Dong's palace was undoubtedly from Xianyuan Wuxiang. Even in the war god world, the seemingly harmless and jovial ninth prince of the spacetime corridor was also very famous. Lin Shi wasn't sure about his current situation, but it was clearly recorded in the war god world that Xianyuan Wuxiang, a holy follower, had part of the authority of an apostle in a certain period. If Xianyuan Wuxiang had the same ability now, it meant that his authority in the order camp had reached an unimaginable level. The apostle was second only to the Doomsday, and in the current human clan, it was almost the peak of technological power. The human clan belonged to the neutral camp, and it was impossible for an apostle to become a Doomsday. At this level, it was the limit of the neutral camp after choosing the order camp. And the holy follower also belonged to the order camp. Xianyuan Wuxiang had chosen two paths of the order camp when he didn't have a neutral force as his foundation, and he hadn't been assimilated into the order camp until now. This was almost a miracle. His status in the spacetime corridor was no lower than Lin Shi's, otherwise he wouldn't have become Li Tianlan's guide. Go around. Lin Shi said calmly. The apostle's eyes flashed slightly and he said softly, I've found a suitable plan. In the shortest time possible he had stored all the information in Miracle City. It wasn't memory but storage. When needed he could recall everything he had stored. The apostle opened his palm. A virtual light curtain rose in front of him, and several continents were spinning rapidly in the light curtain. The continents, the oceans, everything began to converge and quickly turned into a blue planet. We are now in this position. The apostle's finger tapped slightly on the virtual planet. A tiny red dot appeared on the planet. It's 965 kilometers away from the Lin clan's headquarters in a straight line, but worry-free manner has now been affected by the real brand. It's difficult for us to get close for a certain period of time. The Lin clan is very powerful. In addition to the Lin clan's headquarters on this continent, there are also branches in Europe. I've hacked into their database. In terms of comprehensive strength, the Lin clan's branch in Europe should be the strongest. They should be the descendants of the Holy King. It's difficult for us to find a suitable identity here. The apostle's finger tapped again. The virtual sphere in front of him rotated. This is the most suitable place. As he spoke, his complexion began to darken and become a little darker. This is the non-continent. The apostle said softly, in the records of the Lin clan's headquarters worry-free manner, a branch went to the non-continent 65 years ago to develop. Until today they have not contacted the headquarters and have lost contact with the Lin clan's headquarters. I just investigated their information. This branch still exists, but it has been declining for nearly 20 years, and the family is sparsely populated. Your Highness, we can borrow the identity of this family and officially appear in this world. They needed a suitable identity. The declining branch of the non-continent could provide them with such an identity. Even if there was something they couldn't solve, the existence of the apostle could make it seamless. Lin Shi raised his head and looked around. There seemed to be a line of sight falling on him, but the other party didn't say anything. Lin Shi didn't know where the first princess was, and he didn't even know if she was still in Miracle City, but he was sure that he was in the other party's sight. The other party didn't say anything, which meant that she was not dissatisfied with this identity. Lin Shi took a deep breath, suppressed the sullen emotions in his heart, nodded and calmly said, Then let's start with the non-continent. Chapter 1040. When he returned to Mount Dibbing, the battlefield had been quiet. It was not appropriate to call it Mount Dibbing, because the former Mount Dibbing had completely disappeared. There was only an incredibly large pit where the North Sea Sacred Mountain once existed. The tens of meters deep pit was damp. This place was close to the sea, so the water vapor was extremely heavy. Strands of water light were emerging from the bottom of the pit bit by bit. If it was not dealt with, this deep pit would soon become an incomparably huge lake. Wang Xingxiao walked down from the helicopter, stood on the edge of the pit, and looked up at the stage of Formidable Person. Mount Dibbing had disappeared, but the stage of Formidable Person was unscathed. Without the mountain in the way, the stage of Formidable Person looked extremely high, like a holy land built on a cliff. Perhaps no patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai had ever seen this scene. The stage of Formidable Person that was not on Mount Dibbing Wang Xingxiao looked at it silently for a long time. His mood was extremely chaotic. Beihai won the final battle, Mount Dibing disappeared, the Wang family of Beihai still existed, and the bloody battle in Kanglan continued. Different things, different results. What was happening, what had already ended? It was a mess. His heart was also a mess. Some were relieved, some were self-deprecating, some were sad, some were angry, some were glad, some were unwilling, and some were disappointed. Beihai won the final battle, but Wang Xingxiao almost thought that he had suffered a crushing defeat based on the results. The battle lasted only one night, but Beihai's loss was immeasurable. But the gain, except for the right to survive, Wang Xingxiao could not see any gain. Of course, the right to survive was important, but who would think that was the so-called gain? On the edge of the pit were busy elites of the Wang family of Beihai. Although Mount Dibing had disappeared, the mountains within a radius of 100 miles could not be completely destroyed. Everyone was busy cleaning up the battlefield. But Wang Xingxiao did not leave many people here, so it looked extremely cold. Patriarch. A tired and haggard voice sounded behind Wang Xingxiao. A middle-aged woman who looked like she was in her 40s came over. It seemed that because of the cold weather she subconsciously tightened her white down jacket. Wang Xingxiao glanced at her and nodded. His voice was gentle and calm. Thank you. Lu Yu shook her head slightly. She was the logistics supervisor of Mount Dibing. She was responsible for the daily necessities, food, equipment maintenance of various laboratories, personnel entry and exit records, weapon consumption reports and other work. She was not a combatant, but she could be regarded as one of the core management of Mount Dibing. After the battle, she needed to count the losses and report to Wang Xingxiao as soon as possible. Lu Yu knew very well that she must be very annoying in Wang Xingxiao's eyes now. The news she was going to say was definitely not what Wang Xingxiao wanted to hear, but she had to say it. Speak. Wang Xingxiao nodded and went straight to the point. Lu Yu hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "We can't calculate the exact losses for now, and it's hard to calculate it in a short period of time. In terms of personnel losses, 137 of the Heaven Punishment Troops reserve forces died in battle, and 20 were seriously injured. They will lose their ability to fight in the future." Wang Xingxiao gently gritted his teeth. The reserve forces of the Heaven Punishment Troop could almost be regarded as the second team of Heaven Punishment Troop. If the first team lost one person, they would replace one person here. In addition to the high-end combat capability of the Wang family of Beihai, this was the most powerful combat capability of the Wang family of Beihai. The second team, which had only 200 people in total, now lost more than half of them. Apart from other things, this alone made him a little breathless. He took a deep breath and said calmly, "Go on." In addition, the damage to the buildings on the mountain is being further calculated. The main ones are the laboratories in the hinterland of the mountain. Laboratories 2 to 5 were completely damaged and nearly 30 researchers died. More than 200 people were killed, including assistants, cleaners and data collators. All the instruments were scrapped and all the research materials were scrapped. Laboratories 2 to 6 carried out the last data update 2 days ago and made a backup. The research data of these 2 days have all disappeared. In addition, laboratories 7, 8 and 9 were all damaged to different degrees. About 1/5 of the various instruments were damaged, but there were no casualties. Wang Xingxiao's body trembled slightly. The collision between Wu Qing and Li Tianlan destroyed Mount Dibing. This result was already expected, but when he really heard Lu Yu say this, Wang Xingxiao's heart could not help but twitch. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. For laboratories, dozens of staff members were sacrificed. For this alone, the loss of the Wang family of Beihai was no less than tens of billions. Money was secondary. The instruments could also be bought. But the loss of those researchers was the most fatal. Those cutting-edge talents, not to mention the Wang family of Beihai, were extremely precious even in the eyes of an overlord like Zhou State. If one was lost, there would be one less. It was unknown how much resources it would take to replace them. This loss of dozens meant that the research progress of at least a few laboratories of the Wang family of Beihai would be stagnant for a long time. Wang Xingxiao was expressionless. His voice seemed to be squeezed out little by little from his teeth. Go on. The outbreak of this final battle was too sudden. Lu Yu smiled bitterly and helplessly. Starting from Autumn Water all the way to Xingzhou, all the cities in the North Sea have suffered varying degrees of impact. Autumn Water, Skyspan, Kanglan and Empress are the most heavily affected. Patriarch, we have no way to calculate the overall losses, especially when the battle in Kanglan is not over yet. But a conservative estimate and the most optimistic result is that we have lost at least hundreds of billions overnight. What's worse is that from today onwards, rebuilding the North Sea will become even more troublesome. Wang Xingxiao raised his head and looked at the stage of formidable person standing on the cliff. He was silent for a long time. After a long time he nodded and said in a low voice, "I see." Lu Yu waited quietly for a while. After confirming that Wang Xingxiao had no other orders, he left quietly. Wang Xingxiao's figure rose into the air, crossed the deep pit, and landed on the stage of formidable person, which was surrounded by sword energy. The vast sword energy kept echoing on the stage of formidable person. Wang Tianzong's sword energy doppelganger had completely turned into a substance. The doppelganger with strong sword energy seemed to have completely turned into a statue. Above the stage of formidable person, more powerful sword energy kept flowing. Under the sun, the bright moon was still hanging high in the sky, overflowing with clear light. Everything we've lost. Wang Xingxiao's palm fell on the chest of the sword energy statue. I'll take it all back. The sword energy statue seemed to move slightly. The clear light flowed silently. The sword energy doppelganger became a little stiff and sluggish with the silence of Wang Tianzong's main consciousness. Now it only had the most instinctive reaction, and it was an instinctive reaction after combining with worryless energy. He only had power but no sense. But Wang Xingxiao was very clear-headed. He was very rational. What he lacked was power. A transparent sword light bloomed from Wang Xingxiao's hand. The sword energy surged. Wang Xingxiao's aura was raised to the extreme in an instant. All the sword energy was drawn out of his body at a crazy speed and poured into the sword energy statue. Wang Xingxiao's face was pale and his body trembled violently. Everyone could see that he was suffering. He was in great pain. The sword energy statue did not reject Wang Xingxiao's sword energy and absorbed it crazily. In just a few seconds, all the sword energy in Wang Xingxiao's body had been absorbed. Then came the feedback from the sword energy statue. The bright moon hung high in the sun. The clear light all over the sky suddenly became obvious. The sword energy statue stretched out its palm and pressed on Wang Xingxiao's shoulder. The majestic sword energy instantly enveloped Wang Xingxiao's figure. Wang Xingxiao's aura, which had been extremely weak in a short time, began to rise rapidly and return to the peak state in an instant. The majestic sword energy was still hovering around him. The sword energy of the same origin began to resonate in the fluctuation of worryless energy. Wang Xingxiao's whole body was glowing, and the wisps of sword energy around him became more and more as if they were real. In less than a minute, Wang Xingxiao's figure had disappeared in front of the sword energy statue. There was only a faint shadow left where he used to stand. It seemed that the endless sword energy completely wrapped Wang Xingxiao, blocking everyone's sight. At this moment Wang Xingxiao seemed to be wearing a coat of sword energy, or walking into a cage of sword energy. Amidst the blurry sword qi, Wang Xingxiao's eyes were red and his body was covered with blood. No one could see his expression. Standing on the stage of formidable person, he looked at the deep pit under his feet and smiled a little ferociously, but also very comfortably. The energy from Ruthless and Wang Tianzong's sword energy poured into his body completely, almost bursting it. The unimaginably violent sword energy pushed his body to the limit in an instant and then a little more. In this state Wang Tianzong's body was on the verge of collapse, but his physical strength and sword energy had really improved a little. As a price, Wang Xingxiao only suffered some injuries that were not serious. The sword energy spread all over his body, and the sword energy that his body could not contain formed a fuzzy coat of sword energy around him. Worryless didn't have a so-called real body. If he wanted to exert his power he could only merge with the human body under normal circumstances. But now Wang Tianzong's sword energy clone had completely solidified. Wang Xingxiao borrowed the sword from Wang Tianzong, and under the resonance of the sword energy of the same origin, Wang Xingxiao was qualified to use worryless energy. It was difficult for the sword energy clone to leave the stage of formidable person, but Wang Tianzong could walk around with this part of worryless energy. His sword intent could barely control Wang Tianzong's sword energy around him, and Wang Tianzong's sword energy could control Ruthless. In this state, Wang Xingxiao was not good at a protracted battle, because no matter how strong the sword energy around him was, the total amount was limited. But in this state, every time he attacked, it was truly earth-shattering. Wang Xingxiao didn't care about the so-called protracted battle. The entire Wang family of Beihai didn't care. Their martial arts were originally about outbursts. The current state was the most suitable state for Wang Xingxiao. And in this state Wang Xingxiao was also the strongest Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao, whose figure became extremely blurred, took a step forward. Silently he left the stage of formidable person and appeared at the edge of the deep pit again. The people near the deep pit were still busy. Wang Xingxiao was silent for a while, took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. "Prepare a helicopter." His voice was calm. "I need it right away." The steady voice on the phone rang. After a moment of hesitation, the person on the other end of the phone asked cautiously, "Patriarch, where are you going?" Wang Xingxiao smiled blandly and said, "To Kanglin." Chapter 1041. The Kanglin region was already a purgatory on Earth. The ever-expanding battlefield turned every corner of Kanglin into an incomparably cruel meat grinder, and bloody killings spread everywhere. Ruins, blood, smoke and crazy crowds could be seen everywhere. The decisive battle in the North Sea had come to an end, and everyone had entered the final stage of madness. At the start of the battle, it was a sea of people versus an elite. When the final battle was about to end, it was also a battle between a sea of people and an elite. However, the roles of the two sides had already been swapped silently. 4 hours ago, all of North Sea's high-end combat forces had officially crossed the Azure Waves River. Countless experts of the Allied forces were driven back to Kanglin continent from the Jiang clan's headquarters, which was already in a mess, by the high-end combat power of North Sea. The North Sea Legion was constantly mobilized throughout the entire North Sea. The army gathered in the direction of Kanglin, and groups of people constantly squeezed the space of activities of the joint forces. The cannon fodder of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace had used up all their weapons one after another, but the number of cannon fodder was still decreasing at a stunning speed. The flames of war spread everywhere. 2 hours ago, as more and more North Sea Legion elites had arrived, the North Sea Legion's advantage in power had become more and more pronounced. An hour ago, East Island, which had been blocked for a whole night, suddenly recovered the communication. Countless messy news gathered toward East Island crazily. A giant whale, a ferocious bird, a black dragon. The 3 naval forces belonging to Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace inexplicably became the spoils of Zhongzhou State. All the weapons systems were completely out of control. East Island was full of confidence and expectation. The scene of continuous gunfire was totally an illusion. The entire East Island didn't even fire a single bullet overnight. The nightmarish news swept through the entire upper class of East Island. The sect master of the Jifeng Sword Raining School, Yagyu Kurasumi, had fallen. The Limitless Palace's palace master, Tianhai Wuji, had fallen. Less than 1 in 10 experts of the half-step invincible realm survived. The moon rose from the North Sea. Jiang Shangyu was seriously injured and Li Guangtu was seriously injured. Both of them were missing. As for their own side, the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace were turned into ruins under their eyes. The new invincible realm expert of the Holy Zone, Gravich, died and the Holy Disarmament Corps was wiped out. There were countless messages. Not a single piece of good news. East Island didn't even have the time to react to the bad news one after another. The explosive noise filled every place. After the initial anger and disbelief, all the superiors of East Island received a direct and clear order. Retreat. No matter the cost, withdraw as many as you can. However, this order was issued a little too late. Retreat? More and more North Sea Legion elites were gathering, and they had already completely surrounded the Azure Tide Legion. The cannon fodder had been wiped out and all that was left were the elites. In this way, the situation they faced was extremely simple. The high-end combat capability of each joint force had to face the high-end power of the Wang family of Beihai and the endless sea of people. At this moment, not only East Island but the whole Dark World was dead silent, as if it was the end of the world. No one knew why the final battle in Beihai had become like this. Perhaps the reason was no longer important and meaningless. Now, the most realistic situation was in front of countless people in the Dark World. The so-called joint forces included not only East Island, but also Sanctuary Knights Templars, the Jiang family of South America, the power of Snow King Xiaoyao, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and dozens of second-class forces in the Dark World. What did this mean? The scene in front of them was beyond everyone's imagination. When all the intelligence of the entire Dark World was gathered together that night, many people discovered that with the end of the final battle in Beihai, the entire Dark World was already in pieces. It was really in pieces. In Europe, thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps parachuted into the Dark Knights and overturned all the arrangements made by the joint forces around the Dark Knights in the shortest time. The Duke and General of Samsara Palace, who had been silent for several years, suddenly appeared and joined forces with Rothschild to attack Sanctuary. Although His Majesty of Sanctuary retreated calmly, the entire Sanctuary suffered heavy losses. The Holy Disarmament Corps that stayed at the headquarters was scattered and lost more than half of its members. In addition to the part they put in the Dark Knights and the part they lent to Jiang Shangyu for placement in East Island, the overall strength of the strongest Holy Disarmament Corps in Europe was less than 1/10 of its original strength overnight. The entire Sanctuary would lose most of its competitiveness in the Dark World for many years to come. America was also very lively. Lin Fengting personally guarded America. Fantasy World, the Heroes Club, and the branches of the Lin clan gathered together. After destroying an important base of the Jiang family, they couldn't stop and got enough information. In just a few hours, nearly 20 important bases of the Jiang family were completely wiped out, and the headquarters was completely overturned. Countless masters were killed and injured. Patriarch Jiang Guochu died. The Jiang family, which had no successor, might still have some resources, but it had officially withdrawn from the list of superpowers. Superpowers? Overnight, the whole Dark World was turned upside down. After the huge change, the situation began to become clear. Nowadays, there were only a few superpowers that could be called superpowers. Emperor Dong's palace was undoubtedly one. With the end of the final battle in Beihai, Li Tianlong showed his strength with all his strength. After digesting the harvest of the final battle in Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace could even be said to be the strongest superpower in the Dark World. The Wang family of Beihai was also one. Now they had indeed lost their top combat capability, but no one dared to provoke the bright moon in Beihai. The Supreme was supreme. Even if it was just a sword energy doppelganger with the support of infinite energy, it was enough to protect the entire Wang family of Beihai. The Purgatory of Heaven capital could be regarded as half a superpower. Li Guangtu's performance in the final battle was mediocre. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was blocked by Li Tianlong, so it didn't have any sense of existence. However, the appearance of Jiang Shangyu was a surprise. In the current situation, the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Jiang Shangyu could benefit both sides. Even for self-protection, they had to cooperate closely. When the two sides were connected, they might become a new superpower. After that, there was nothing. This looked like a scene of three parties competing for hegemony, but no one would forget the component departments of the joint forces. In addition to the two martial arts sects of East Island, the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars, the largest component of the entire joint forces were the dozens of second-class forces. What did second-class forces mean? The superpowers were the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace, and the former Jiang family. These behemoths had invincible realm experts, stable inheritances, sufficient funds, profound resources, murderous weapons, absolute right to speak in one or some fields, and their own headquarters, stable bases, and more room for development in a certain country. This was the so-called superpower. Below the superpower were the so-called first-class forces. Strictly speaking, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Dark Knights, and the former Samsara Palace belonged to the limit of the first-class forces, only half a step or even a small step away from the superpower. This kind of giants that reached the bottleneck and were not afraid of the superpower were even fewer than the superpower. Now only the Dark Knights, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and some special warfare centers of the major super countries with strong national factors and strong inclinations were the latter. The latter basically did not have much freedom. Most of the time they represented the national standpoint, and were completely incomparable with some truly transcendent giants. Then there were the second-class forces. The second-class forces were the main force of the entire Dark World. The super-large mercenary groups in the Dark World, the killer organizations hidden in the dark, the drug lords who could mobilize hundreds of thousands of elite combat forces, the arms groups that were tightly organized to pursue interests and so on. These were all standard second-class forces. Occasionally, there would be an invincible realm expert or at least one or two half-step invincible realm experts to support them. The joint force formed by Jiang Shangyu was a giant supported by dozens of second-class forces. The cruel thing was that there were only dozens of second-class forces in the entire Dark World. Jiang Shangyu's momentum was too great. At this time, most of the second-class forces in the Dark World had participated in the decisive battle in Beihai. The joint force in the decisive battle in Beihai had failed, but countless elite experts of second-class forces were still in Kanglan. The situation in Kanglan had become more and more clear. If this group of people were all wiped out in Kanglan, the entire Dark World would usher in a blank period that had never been seen in hundreds of years. This was a huge blank that involved all the fields of the Dark World. Where there was a blank space, it was impossible to really remain blank all the time. Therefore, there would be competition, there would be killing, there would be schemes. This was enough to make anyone lose their mind. The Wang family of Beihai would take action in order to make up for the losses in the past few years. Emperor Dong's palace would also take action in order to continue to strengthen itself and form a real dynasty. The position of the combination of Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu had been clear. They would also find ways to strengthen themselves and continue to covet Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. The few second-class forces left in the Dark World would also see the opportunity and want to make themselves first-class forces. And some countries that had lost their reliance in the Dark World, such as East Island, several countries in America and Italy, they were also eager to restore their status in the Dark World and establish a new order. Zhongzhou State, Star State, Snow Country, European continent. These behemoths would also try their best to develop their forces because of the huge blank space in the Dark World. The entire Dark World was almost completely emptied overnight. No one would be calm in the face of such a situation. So it could be foreseen that the next Dark World would be an extremely chaotic and noisy world. No one would be anyone's friend and no one would be anyone's enemy. In a chaotic world, only interests were eternal. Countless people, countless forces and countless ideas. The helicopter roared in the air and approached Kanglan, which was almost in ruins. The coat woven by the majestic sword energy had gradually become stable. Wang Xingxiao, whose face was slightly pale, sat calmly in the cabin and watched Kanglan get closer and closer to him. He had no extra thoughts. The sword energy was swirling around him. His only thought was that he was lucky. Chapter 1042. The eternal sword over Mormons was undoubtedly the biggest misfortune of the Wang family of Beihai in recent years. It was like a terrible starting point. Wang Tianzong, who could have established a real dynasty and brought the Wang family of Beihai back to its peak, fell into a crisis of life and death. The betrayal of Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei. The suppression of Beihai by Zhongzhou State. The development of Li Tianlong and Emperor Dong's palace. Since that sword stroke, unfortunate things kept happening one after another. So the Wang family of Beihai was on the verge of collapse. No one knew how much pressure Wang Xingxiao had endured in the past 2 years. His mother, wife and son were all sent out of Beihai by him. Even when his son was born, he never left Mount Dipping. The 7 major sword-holding families, countless important figures, and the core of Beihai province all looked like poor people who had homes but couldn't go back. There were internal and external troubles. Wang Xingxiao could only bear it. All the responsibilities of the entire Beihai were on him in an instant. He couldn't push it away or escape it. Everything was pressing on him. He couldn't even relax when he slept and he had to be careful when he breathed. Zhongzhou State, Beihai, Snow Country and the Dark World. In the open and in the dark there were sabers and swords. Wang Xingxiao walked over step by step. He was already physically and mentally exhausted and bruised. Only when his family was really in a desperate situation did he realize that he was not as strong as he thought. Wang Xingxiao had made a lot of decisions in the past 2 years, tough, weak, stupid, impulsive and rational. Under the gaze of countless people in a place where countless people couldn't see, he compromised and made concessions again and again. Time and time again he compromised and made tough attacks. Under his full control, the giant ship of the Wang family of Beihai faced the tides, the waves and the future full of malice. The ship kept going up and down. Today, right now, all of this would come to an end. In the 2 years since he became the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the Southeast Group, the biggest reliance of Beihai in Zhongzhou State, had shrunk by 1/3. The interests of Zhongzhou state in various fields had also shrunk by about a third. Many large groups belonging to Beihai had been merged and suppressed by competitors. Their status, assets, and competitiveness had declined. The personnel establishment of the North Sea Corps had been greatly increased, but with the betrayal of Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei, and with the sacrifice of many middle and basic personnel in the decisive battle in North Sea, the comprehensive combat effectiveness of the North Sea Corps, which had hundreds of thousands of soldiers, had not only not improved, but had also declined significantly. With the current state of the North Sea Corps, it had lost the qualification to compete with the Border Control Corps for the world's strongest large-scale integrated army. The North Sea also suffered heavy losses, especially in the southern part of the North Sea. Countless places had been reduced to ruins. It could be said that there were 1,000 things waiting to be done. The North Sea Laboratory had suffered heavy losses, and the loss of dozens of researchers could not be made up for in a short period of time. The losses were immeasurable. The invincible image of Beihai had been seriously damaged. After this stop, the status of Mount Dibing in the eyes of the citizens of Beihai might plummet. The loss was simply incalculable. The North Sea Demon Legion was completely wiped out. This was North Sea's most hidden force, but it had been completely wiped out. More than 10 thundershocking realm experts of Beihai died in battle. More than half of the internal guards, Heaven Punishing Unit and Heaven Punishing Unit 2 were lost. Beihai was no longer the most powerful superpower in the Dark World and was rapidly being replaced by Emperor Dong's palace. Countless losses, unimaginable losses. But Beihai won the decisive battle. After more than 2 years as a patriarch, Wang Xingxiao didn't know if he was qualified. But today he finally saw his own stage. He put down all the losses. The only thing he had to do was to make up for these losses. He would not accept the ridiculous plan left by Li Tianlong before he left. It was impossible and he was not willing to accept it. Everything that Beihai had lost had to be made up for in the decisive battle. Zhongzhou state in the Dark World. So he was extremely glad. Glad that there was Worryless and Wang Tianzong. In hundreds of years of history, it was not the first time that Beihai had encountered a real crisis of life and death. But today was the first time that Worryless made a move. It was not that it was impossible before, but because Worryless was a pure energy core, there were too many restrictions to use, and Beihai did not have the conditions to use it at all. But after Wang Tianzong, everything was completely different. Although Wang Tianzong was not in his prime, his sword chi doppelganger could already control Worryless in this state. Before Wang Tianzong's consciousness woke up, the tide of sword energy subconsciously rolled up and Beihai had been providing a way for Wang Xingxiao to continue to make progress. The sword energy of the father and son came from the same source. With the sword chi doppelganger as a bridge, the sword energy of both sides resonated. Wang Xingxiao no longer needed to pay a heavy price to integrate with Worryless. He was directly qualified to use Worryless energy. And he could leave Beihai with Worryless energy and the sword chi of the sword chi doppelganger. The supreme sword energy and the absolutely abundant energy formed a vague coat around Wang Xingxiao. This was not a domain, but an absolutely stable power formed by the integration of sword energy and energy. Of course, this power had its limits, but for the current Wang Xingxiao, it was enough to support his extravagance. Before this outer garment was destroyed or completely consumed, there was no damage that could directly harm his body. Li Tianlong did not know that in a short time after he left Beihai, Wang Xingxiao had the absolute confidence to face Emperor Dong's palace. Kanglin City was already in sight. The tragic battlefield came into view. Wang Xingxiao's expression was extremely calm. Today, at this moment, he would personally start the real chaos in the Dark World and push the Wang family of Beihai to the top again in the chaos. This was the first time he had set foot on this stage that only belonged to Li Tianlong, Jiang Shangyu and a few others. The whole world should remember his name and his Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xingxiao stood up. Step back. He spoke slowly. The extremely calm sound wave suddenly swept across the entire Kanglin city the moment he spoke. The boundless sword energy slowly surged between heaven and earth. In the city where there was a frenzied killing, countless battlefields paused subconsciously for a moment. The next second, a large number of elites of the Wang family of Beihai began to retreat subconsciously. The elites of the joint forces scattered everywhere instinctively breathed a sigh of relief, and then began to gather in the direction of the city center. The sudden retreat of Beihai could be said to have directly relieved their pressure. In the face of the siege from all directions, their battlefield was completely divided into countless parts. Many people had been desperate, but at this time they saw the opportunity and suddenly had the fighting spirit. At this time there were not many people in the joint forces, but those who survived in this situation were all experts. This was the coalition from various second-class forces. Although there were only thousands of people left, if they gathered together and broke through at the same time, they might have a chance to survive. On the helicopter, Wang Xingxiao, who was covered from head to toe in his coat, narrowed his eyes. Silently, the sword energy coat that covered him and tore up the space gently flew. The majestic sword energy and surging energy suddenly spread between heaven and earth. The entire sky of Kanglan City became blurred. The sword energy roared. The world was boiling. Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath. He didn't need to suppress anything and he didn't need to be careful. The feeling of breathing freely was so good and so relaxing. He felt that his body was constantly extending and becoming extremely huge. Standing on the helicopter, he was like a giant constantly expanding his body. His body spread to Kanglan City, to Kanglan River, the streets and alleys, every tall building, every piece of land, every grain of dust, every drop of blood, every fallen leaf, every drop of water. Everything in the world seemed to become a part of his body. The sword energy was mighty. Wang Xingxiao's voice resounded throughout the city. I'll play with you. Chapter 1043. There was silence over Kanglan City. As Wang Xingxiao's voice sounded, the gathering joint forces became completely quiet. Then there was an uproar. I'll play with you. What does this sentence mean? There were few people who could recognize that the speaker was Wang Xingxiao, but the meaning of this sentence was extremely obvious no matter how it was translated. He wants to play with the joint forces alone? What does he think the joint forces are? What does he think he is? The elites of the allied forces continued to gather at the center of the city from all directions. After several hours of bloody battle, those who managed to survive were few in number with heaven-defying luck. Basically, all of them were experts, so even if they were injured or exhausted, their movements were still agile. The army of Beihai slowly retreated. In less than 10 minutes, the allied forces had finished assembling, forming an extremely beautiful formation that could be used for both offense and defense. More than 70% of the elites of the dark forces in the entire dark world were here. There was no need to mention the dead. At this moment, there were nearly 30 experts of the half-step invincible realm of the joint forces who were still alive, and more than 10 of them were top experts of the half-step invincible realm. Below the experts of the half-step invincible realm, there were nearly 40 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and nearly 100 experts of the thunder-shocking realm. The joint forces did suffer heavy losses, but at this time, there were at least 2,000 or 3,000 people left. Those who could survive until now were all below the fire-flaming realm. What kind of lineup was this? Dozens of experts of the half-step invincible realm. Dozens of experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Nearly 100 experts of the thunder-shocking realm. Thousands of experts of the fire-flaming realm. Such a lineup meant that if there was no Beihai Corps for the high-end combat force of Mount Dibbing, this was a force that they could not resist at all. That was the truth. The lineup of dozens of second-class forces was too exaggerated. The experts of Mount Dibbing led the Beihai Corps to counterattack Kanglan City several times, but they were easily killed by the other side. But as the army of Beihai increased, they officially entered Kanglan City. But after several hours of fierce fighting, blood flowed like a river. Most of the people who died were elites and cannon fodder of Beihai, Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. The loss of the real experts of the joint forces was extremely limited. On the contrary, the loss of experts of the thunder-shocking realm in Beihai had exceeded double digits. The only reason was that the other party had too many experts and their explosive power was too strong. Phoenix, Punishment, Firmament, Enchantress and other well-known superiors of the half-step invincible realm were all seriously injured. As for the joint forces, the top superiors didn't have any obvious casualties. There were more and more elites from North Sea in Kanglan. The human wave tactic became more and more exaggerated. If they continued to fight, North Sea would naturally win. They seemed to be at a disadvantage now, but that was because the difference in high-end combat power was indeed quite huge. Moreover, the other side's stamina had not been exhausted. However, as time passed, The endless sea of people could completely exhaust all the experts' stamina. As long as they were willing to pay the price, victory was only a matter of time. A stalemate that was destined to be built by life and death was stopped by Wang Xingxiao. The new chief of North Sea wanted to play with them? Did the new chief of North Sea really think of himself as the Eastern Emperor of Tianan? The members of the United Forces had all gathered in one place. At the front of the crowd, several superiors of the half-step invincible realms surrounded an old European man who seemed to be in his twilight years. The old man stood at the front of the crowd, squinting at the sky above. Wang Xingxiao's voice rang out in the air. But no one could see where he was. The surroundings were already blurred and the sky was slightly distorted. The almost boiling mighty sword energy filled the whole city everywhere, but no one could detect it. Everyone could only see the blurred world, the blurred city, and the sword energy was everywhere. Even the elites of the North Sea Corps who were gradually retreating around began to become blurred. Wang Xingxiao. The old man's voice was low and cold. Most of the people of the United Forces might not know who was speaking, but he had cooperated with the Wang family of North Sea. The moment Wang Xingxiao spoke, he had already confirmed his identity. Rawls. The space was slightly distorted for a moment. High in the sky, Wang Xingxiao's figure appeared in front of everyone without any warning. Everyone of the United Forces tensed up for a moment. The place where Wang Xingxiao appeared was less than 100 meters away from them. We haven't seen each other for about 2 years. There was no emotion in Wang Xingxiao's voice. The old man narrowed his eyes and did not speak. The name Rawls was unknown in the dark world, but when it came to Godfather, almost everyone knew him. The so-called Godfather was not the Godfather of the Mafia, but the leader of the largest killer organization in the Dark World, the Dark Knight Kingdom. The Dark Knight Kingdom had existed in the Dark World for more than 200 years. They might not be the strongest killer organization. In terms of high-end force, they could not be compared with Sai City in Zhongzhou State at all. But they were recognized as the largest killer organization. There were more than 12,000 officially registered killers in the Dark Knight Kingdom, and there were hundreds of branches in dozens of countries around the world. Even the Wang family of North Sea would choose to cooperate with them when it was inconvenient to do something. The Dark Knight Kingdom was the top second-class force. Their only flaw was that they did not have their own invincible realm experts. Rawls was very close to this realm. As the top half-step invincible realm expert, he could even barely be regarded as the combat capability of the invincible realm. He was also the chief commander of the United Forces in Kanglan City at this time. Wang Xingxiao's eyes moved from Rawls to the whole place. "I can give you a chance," he said blandly. "Join the Wang family of North Sea and I can allow you to live." There was silence. Rawls began to speak. "What if we don't agree?" His voice was dry, but it was incomparably cold. "Then you will die here," Wang Xingxiao said matter-of-factly. "Ha," Rawls laughed. "Maybe you will win, but look at these people around you, these elites of North Sea. I can tell you responsibly that if you want to kill us all, at least half of the people here will die with us. Mr. Young Chief, have you made up your mind?" "Half," Wang Xingxiao said to himself silently and shook his head slightly. "I alone am enough." "Really?" A cold and gloomy voice suddenly rang out from an extremely close distance. Rawls's figure was still standing in the same place. But his real body appeared behind Wang Xingxiao in an instant. The ghostly figure left a long shadow in the blur of heaven and earth. Rawls held a dim dagger and stabbed it directly at Wang Xingxiao's back. This was a sudden outburst. Rawls could barely be regarded as the strength of the invincible realm. This knife did not seem to have any momentum, but it was fast, extremely fast. Wang Xingxiao slightly raised his eyebrows. Facing the silent knife behind him, he directly stretched out his palm. His body turned in an instant, and his outstretched palm suddenly grasped the blade that was stabbing him. The violent thunderbolt directly exploded in Wang Xingxiao's palm. Wang Xingxiao's figure was slightly blurred. His palm moved. Crack. The weapon in Rawls's hand, which had accompanied him for many years, was instantly broken into 2 pieces. Wang Xingxiao held the broken blade and casually cut it. Under countless incredulous gazes, Rawls didn't even have the slightest chance to resist. His body was directly cut into 2 by the broken blade. With blood splattering all over the sky, the 2 halves of his corpse fell straight down from the sky. Wang Xingxiao casually threw away the blade in his hand and slowly turned around. "Do you want to die or live?" he asked calmly. Chapter 1044. They were dumbfounded. Whether it was the experts of the joint forces or the elites of the Wang family of Beihai, everyone was dumbfounded. No one dared to believe their eyes. Although Rawls could barely be regarded as the combat capability of the invincible realm, and he could only be regarded as the weakest one, his realm was there. After all, he could be regarded as an existence beyond the half-step invincible realm. And as the godfather of the largest killer organization in the Dark World, he could definitely be regarded as one of the most powerful killers in the Dark World. Everyone saw him flash to the back of Wang Xingxiao in an instant. He made a move. Killers never paid attention to momentum when they carried out an assassination. They pursued stealth and speed. Rawls' seemingly simple saber strike had no special features except that it was fast. But if an expert of the half-step invincible realm or even the invincible realm was successfully attacked, the chance of surviving would be less than 30%. But what happened now? Rawls's figure flickered. Before the residual shadow he left completely dissipated, his real body had been cut in half by Wang Xingxiao's saber. Wang Xingxiao, was he so strong? Everyone was in a trance. The Wang family of Beihai was not in a good situation now. Its deterrence was gradually declining, and it was even surpassed by Emperor Dong's palace. The biggest reason was the lack of top combat capability of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xiaoyao gradually drifted away from Mount Dibing and even completely turned against him. Dijiang was imprisoned. Wang Tianzong had been silent for more than 2 years. Today Mount Dibing could still be regarded as full of experts, but there was no expert standing at the peak of the Dark World. Because of this, the joint forces could quickly gather such a huge force. Everyone wanted to overthrow the Wang family of Beihai and rob their interests while there were no absolute experts in the Wang family of Beihai. Now the joint forces of Beihai lost the final battle. But for some experts of the half-step invincible realm and the thundershocking realm, they were angry, disappointed and unwilling, but they were not afraid. No one could feel the real crisis of life and death. Because the Wang family of Beihai no longer had that kind of desperate experts. The current siege was really difficult. It was difficult for them to win, and their forces would also suffer heavy losses. But if they were patient and wanted to break through, no matter if they were in the half-step invincible realm or the thundershocking realm, they had a lot of confidence. So when Wang Xingxiao asked them to join the Wang family of Beihai, they all thought it was a joke. How could they join the Wang family of Beihai as a dog? All of them were thinking about breaking out of the encirclement. Wang Xingxiao couldn't stop them, nor could the experts of the Wang family of Beihai, let alone the Beihai core. The people of Beihai might kill all the subordinates they brought, but as long as they could break out of the encirclement, they could ensure that the core structure of their force would not suffer too much. The loss of strength would certainly make people feel distressed, but this was a loss suffered by dozens of second-class forces together. After the war, the risk of being taken advantage of by others would also be greatly reduced. As long as they could survive, why should they join the Wang family of Beihai? But now, looking at Wang Xingxiao standing in midair, the joint forces were dead silent. Killing Rawls with a single slash. Had Wang Xingxiao broken through to the invincible realm? But the invincible realm was not enough. At the forefront of the joint forces, dozens of invincible realm experts moved almost at the same time. Join the Wang family of Beihai? This option could not possibly exist. At this point, even if Wang Xingxiao really reached Wang Tianzong's realm, they could not join the Wang family of Beihai. They knew how much damage they had caused to Beihai overnight. Regardless of the Wang family of Beihai, this kind of thing from the point of view of any force leader, could not be forgiven for what they did. Regardless of the leader's inner feelings, if they really accepted them, other people in Beihai would not feel too comfortable. Now Beihai wanted them to join because they really needed their strength. But when they stabilized their position, those who had caused great damage to Beihai and then joined Beihai would end up extremely miserable. They could not compromise. The joint forces were not ready to compromise either. Even if Wang Xingxiao really entered the invincible realm, he would not be so scared that they dared not to make a move. Boom! In the silence, without any hesitation, dozens of half-step invincible realm experts suddenly attacked with all their strength. The world shrouded by sword energy was completely torn apart in an instant. The extremely violent attack concentrated on Wang Xingxiao at the same time. Countless lights and shadows crisscrossed. The half-step invincible realm experts could form pseudo-domains with all their strength. In an instant, dozens of pseudo-domains all fell around Wang Xingxiao and kept exploding around him. The space was shaking violently. Surrounded by dozens of pseudo-domains, Wang Xingxiao's figure was almost completely torn apart in an instant, but there was no blood. The dozens of half-step invincible realm experts of the joint forces were stunned. Many experts of the Wang family of Beihai, who were ready to fight desperately, were also stunned. The young but very familiar voice suddenly sounded in the air. Wang Xingxiao hummed lightly without any emotion. He seemed to get the answer he wanted and said calmly, "You want to die. Just you and these cannon fodders." A half-step invincible realm expert sneered, full of confidence. Wang Xingxiao was indeed very strong now, and there were many experts of the Wang family of Beihai. But in terms of experts, they were now in an absolute advantage. Even if these people of Beihai attacked together, they could spare enough half-step invincible realm experts to besiege Wang Xingxiao while dealing with the other side. Die. Maybe many of them would die, but how could the high-end experts of the joint forces die so easily? I'm enough. As Wang Xingxiao spoke, his body appeared in front of everyone again. You, the half-step invincible realm expert of the joint forces, sneered, but he only said one word and his voice suddenly stopped. Another Wang Xingxiao appeared in front of everyone without warning. Then the third one. The fourth one. The fifth one. There were more and more Wang Xingxiao. The mighty sword energy that filled the world finally stopped hiding at this moment. The sword energy soared into the sky. The sword intent was boiling, the world was boiling, the whole city was shaking, and the Kanglan River not far away was roaring wildly. There was a sudden loud roar between heaven and earth. The surging and roaring Kanglan River suddenly set off a monstrous wave that was hundreds of meters high. The huge wave surged into the sky and the river water was like a torrent, getting higher and larger. From a distance, it looked like a mountain suddenly rose and covered the whole Kanglan River. The unimaginable sword energy flowed in the huge wave and rolled in every drop of water. The monstrous wave pounced on the messy Kanglan River. The ruins within hundreds of meters of the river were completely destroyed in an instant. A large amount of water poured into Kanglan River. In everyone's sight, the huge wave began to break down. The water drops flew everywhere, with wisps of sword energy constantly twisting in everyone's sight. In the blink of an eye, they turned into Wang Xingxiao one after another. There were more and more Wang Xingxiao. The sun in the sky, the fallen leaves in the air, the blood in the ruins, the flying dust and the broken stones. The whole Kanglan River had been completely filled with sword energy at this moment. Wherever the sword energy passed, everything seemed to become Wang Xingxiao. There were so many of them. East, west, north and south, in all directions, the densely packed Wang Xingxiao occupied every street, every intersection and every building. They appeared on the city's roads, on the roofs, in the ruins, in every window of the building, and in every residential building. Everyone was moving towards the location of the united forces. At the end of their sight, more and more Wang Xingxiao were appearing. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, endless Wang Xingxiao completely occupied Kanglan City and rushed in the direction of the joint forces. It was like a vast and mighty tide. But wherever the tide passed, it brought with it endless surging flames. It was 12 o'clock at noon. It was the 14th hour of the final battle in Beihai. The battle in Kanglan River came to an end. The final battle in Beihai came to an end. The endless Wang Xingxiao had disappeared in Kanglan River, leaving only Wang Xingxiao's real body. Blood flowed like a river and countless corpses fell in different directions. 2.5 hours of fighting. Dozens of half-step invincible realm experts, dozens of thundershocking realm experts, nearly 100 thundershocking realm experts, and thousands of fire-flaming realm experts of the joint forces. They were all wiped out. No one escaped from Beihai alive. When Wang Xingxiao's real body reappeared in Kanglan River, more than 70% of the power of the entire dark world had become completely blank. Wang Xingxiao was in high spirits. The sword energy coat covering his body became more and more blurred and unfathomable. Wang Xingxiao looked at the corpses all over the ground and was silent for a while. Young master. Discipline walked over cautiously but still insisted on using the previous address. Wang Xingxiao hummed and said softly, "You deal with the matter in Beihai. What about you, young master?" Discipline was stunned. "Me," Wang Xingxiao smiled and said, "Courtesy demands reciprocity. I'll go to Emperor Dong's palace." Chapter 1045. To Emperor Dong's Palace. Hearing this, all the experts of the Wang family of Beihai turned their heads at the same time and looked at Wang Xingxiao. Everyone's eyes were a little complicated. At this time, as the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Xingxiao was absolutely not welcome to Emperor Dong's palace. In addition to the foreseeable interests, the main reason why Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace could cooperate was the attitude of Zhongzhou state. To be exact, it was the attitude that Zhongzhou state wanted to uproot Beihai. This tough attitude not only made the Wang family of Beihai uneasy, but also Emperor Dong's palace uneasy. The two forces took almost the same development route. Zhongzhou state could treat Beihai like this when Beihai was weak, so it could naturally deal with Tianan when Emperor Dong was weak. Emperor Dong's palace had to express its support for the Wang family of Beihai. If Emperor Dong's palace was about to be destroyed, the Wang family of Beihai would undoubtedly find a way to protect Emperor Dong's palace, even if it was only in name. The two sides were undoubtedly opponents, but when facing Zhongzhou state they could be each other's shields. Zhongzhou state also worried about this, so they united with Wang Qinglei. Through Wang Qinglei they contacted Jiang Shangyu, who pretended to be mysterious at that time, and then set up a joint force, intending to use external forces to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. At the same time they hinted to Emperor Dong's palace to take a step back. However, a series of things that happened later were completely out of their control, so Li Tianlan came to Mount Dibbing in person. Li Tianlan ended the final battle of Beihai. After the final battle, Wang Xingxiao set off the chaos of the Dark World. Everything was over. Everything had just begun. Under such circumstances, the cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace had officially ended. No one could tell the relationship between Li Tianlan and Beihai. Enemy? Opponent? No matter what, in short, they would no longer be friends, nor would they be allies. What was Wang Xingxiao going to Tianan at this time? Courtesy demanded reciprocity. The use of this word was quite meaningful. But no one thought that Wang Xingxiao meant to express his gratitude to Li Tianlan for helping Beihai. At this time, this sentence seemed to be referring to Li Tianlan's sweeping across Beihai more than 2 years ago. Punishment raised his eyebrows. An incomparably fierce battle intent flashed across his somewhat aged face, and then he fell silent again. Young master now? Punishment's tone was tentative. The strength that Wang Xingxiao had just shown was completely incredible. No, it couldn't even be described as strength. It was a strength that completely exceeded everyone's imagination. 2.5 hours of fighting. Countless Wang Xingxiaos had completely filled the city. He alone had transformed into an army of hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. At least a few 100,000. Hundreds of thousands of sword chi clones ignored everything, and all of them were in the fire-flaming realm. This strength was not strong. The sword chi doppelgangers were not even at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Each of them looked like elites who had exhausted their potential and barely entered the fire-flaming realm. With such strength, if it was just an individual, they were not even as good as some experts at the peak of the ice-condensing realm with excellent potential. But the problem was that there were too many of them. The majestic sword chi swept through the entire city, turning into clones of sword chi one after another. At that moment Wang Xingxiao was everywhere and omnipotent. All the people of the united forces fell down one by one, and the whole army was wiped out. No one survived. No one knew why Wang Xingxiao had suddenly become so powerful. For Beihai it didn't matter. What mattered was who was stronger between Wang Xingxiao and Li Tianlan now. Comparing Wang Xingxiao to Li Tianlan. For more than 2 years, no one in Beihai had even thought about this question. But now, recalling the scene just now, everyone's heart suddenly became incomparably excited. No one in Beihai knew exactly how strong Li Tianlan was. The #1 expert in the Dark World was just a pure and even a vague concept. Did Wang Xingxiao have the strength to rival Li Tianlan now? I feel good now. Wang Xingxiao smiled. He was now full of energy, qi and spirit, and the sword energy coat on him was still growing. After more than 2 hours of fighting and thousands of deaths, he was not even stained with blood at this time. This feeling was extremely wonderful. In such a battle, everyone in the united forces was like a real non-entity. The endless sword energy flowing around him reminded him every minute and second. This feeling was the feeling of standing at the peak of this era. Everything about fighting in the Dark World, this sword energy could give him whatever he wanted. Don't be nervous. Wang Xingxiao glanced at Discipline and said softly, I'm just going to Emperor Dong's palace to get something. There's no need to have a conflict with them. What is it? Discipline's tone was a little hesitant and tentative. Xinyuan Feng. Wang Xingxiao's voice was calm and firm. Ruthless without energy was Xinyuan Feng. Everyone's body trembled slightly. I'll go with young master. Discipline didn't stop Wang Xingxiao, but made his attitude clear without hesitation. Count me in. Firmament's voice was hoarse. Count me in. The enchantress covered in blood also came out. More and more people came out and surrounded Wang Xingxiao, their attitudes extremely firm. Stay. Wang Xingxiao said quietly. He was silent for a second and continued, there's no need. As there was no need. Wang Xingxiao didn't think there would be any fighting when he went to get Ruthless this time. Ruthless had no energy. As Xianyuan Feng, his will was at the lowest point and there was no room for resistance. As for Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao thought of the lifeless desert near Mount Dibbing. He was sure that Li Tianlan had encountered some extremely strong threats after leaving Mount Dibbing. He didn't know what happened to the desert. The only speculation was that Li Tianlan had used the dragon vein to drain the nearby vitality. What else could he do with such a large sum of money except for healing? Li Tianlan was very likely to be in a state of serious injury now. No one in the entire Emperor Dong's palace could pose a threat to him. He was determined to get Xianyuan Feng. His current state was extremely special. The sword energy coat on his body was indeed improving his realm and transforming his body all the time. But his strength came from the energy of Wang Tianzong's sword Qi doppelganger and worryless. As long as Wang Xingxiao didn't squander his power all the time, this state could indeed last for a long time. 3 years, 5 years, maybe longer. But this was not a permanent solution after all. He wasn't sure how long he could be strong and he wasn't sure when Wang Tianzong could recover. The only way was to get a new way to deter the dark world before the sword energy of worryless and the sword Qi doppelganger was used up. Xianyuan Feng was undoubtedly the most suitable choice. Xianyuan Feng and worryless were originally a combination of murderous weapons, which meant that there was no obstacle to the integration of the two. Worryless was a pure energy core. With Ruthless as a carrier, its energy cycle would be infinitely accelerated. At that time, the speed of Xianyuan Feng's energy replenishment would be several times higher. A Xianyuan Feng that was full of energy and could be used many times was enough to ensure that the Wang family of Beihai would be truly invincible for decades to come. If Wang Xingxiao held Xianyuan Feng in his current state, he would be the heavenly son of this era. Wang Xingxiao didn't consider whether it was unfair to Emperor Dong's palace. They were not friends. Li Tianlan was seriously injured and Emperor Dong's palace was weak. This was what he should consider. Because Li Tianlan helped the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Xingxiao would protect the entire Emperor Dong's palace when Li Tianlan was seriously injured. Xianyuan Feng? In his view, this was just interest. Maybe the interest was a little high, but Emperor Dong's palace didn't have the right to choose. Wang Xingxiao didn't care about taking advantage of the situation. His purpose was so pure and clear. Get Xianyuan Feng. At all costs. Li Tianlan is in a very bad state now. It's very likely that he's seriously injured. It's unlikely that he'll make a move. Wang Xingxiao's voice was calm and confident. And, his eyes narrowed slightly. Even if he's unharmed, he may not be a match for me now. Chapter 1046. The wind and snow had stopped and the streets were flowing. As the city least affected by the decisive battle, after the tragic night, Shenzhou acted as if nothing had happened. The people coming and going were calm and leisurely without any panic. What happened last night could be said to be a really trivial matter for Shenzhou. The small elite of the joint forces did not make any waves in Shenzhou at all. In different positions, the battle ended completely more than 10 minutes after it started. All the assassination plans to cause chaos had failed. This had something to do with the fact that this was the capital of Beihai, close to Mount Dibbing. It also had something to do with the urban structure of Shenzhou. No vehicles could be seen on the ground of Shenzhou. Not even one. All the roads in the whole city were sidewalks. There were no traffic lights or overpasses. Private cars, buses, and even battery-powered cars and bicycles in Shenzhou used the underground traffic network. The sidewalks on the ground of the whole Shenzhou were accessible in all directions. The planning of the whole Shenzhou was like a huge park, lush and green without the slightest noise of vehicles. Such urban planning was extremely difficult to cause chaos. A city's war alarm could clear the ground in the shortest time. In a favorable situation, the Beihai Corps could also take the initiative to attack. Chaos? The chaos was completely over before it started. Jiang Shangyu stood quietly in front of the window, silently looking at the lush Xingzhou city outside the window. His eyes were a little absent-minded, as if he was thinking about something. In 12 hours at most, the investigation of Mount Dibing will appear here. If we don't leave in time, the consequences will be unimaginable. Li Guangtu, whose breath had been extremely weak, sat on the sofa and said in a weak voice. They were now in a very ordinary 3-star hotel in Xingzhou City. After escaping from the dense forest, Jiang Shangyu took him and Moraid, who was in a coma, directly to this place. Jiang Shangyu had obviously prepared a way out. This room was a long-term private room opened with someone else's ID card. No matter how they checked, the owner of the ID card would not have anything to do with Jiang Shangyu. This was undoubtedly the first place to stay. Since Jiang Shangyu could prepare here, he obviously had a clear plan for leaving Beihai. The moment they entered the hotel, Li Guangtu really confirmed that Jiang Shangyu had actually made preparations for failure, even though he had a great advantage. This is something that Beihai can do. They also have the strength to do so. Jiang Shangyu came to his senses and shook his head. But I know that compared with the investigation that will happen soon, the seemingly peaceful Xingzhou is the real dragnet. As long as we leave the hotel, we will be tracked by Mount Dibing in less than half an hour. At that time, Jiang Shangyu shrugged and didn't go on to say it. It's impossible for me to recover within 12 hours. Li Guangtu's voice was low and weak. He was seriously injured this time. Facing Li Tianlan and Wu You, the overwhelming sword qi accumulated serious injuries again and again. It was extremely difficult for him to sneak attack Li Tianlan in the dense forest. That sword strike had drained all his strength, and his internal organs were in a state of serious overdraft. 12 hours. Even if the time was doubled, Li Guangtu could not recover his combat capability. Any kind of combat power. The current Li Guangtu was not even comparable to an ordinary person. He was truly powerless. He believed that Jiang Shangyu, who seemed to be in a much better condition than him, was the same. If he still had any combat capability, his domain could cover the three of them and they could leave Beihai without being noticed. Now there were no masters in Beihai who could fight. Those thunder-shocking realm and half-step invincible realm experts could walk in front of them without being noticed under Jiang Shangyu's domain. If Jiang Shangyu could do this, there was no need for him to come to this hotel. This was also why Li Guangtu felt that Jiang Shangyu was thoughtful. This hotel and this room looked ordinary, but it meant that Jiang Shangyu had already prepared for the worst. He was not only thinking about failure, but also what to do when he had no combat capability. Me too. Jiang Shangyu smiled. But it doesn't matter. We are in a much better situation now that we can leave Mount Dibing in that dense forest. What's your plan? Li Guangtu looked at him quietly. Jiang Shangyu looked up at his watch and said slowly, "Wait a little longer. Someone will come to pick us up. We will soon leave Xingzhou and then Beihai." Li Guangtu fell silent and did not speak. The room was quiet again. Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu were silent. Moraid lay quietly on the bed, not making a sound. The atmosphere was depressing and boring. "Say," Li Guangtu suddenly said, "is Li Tianlan dead?" "I don't know." Jiang Shangyu thought for a moment and said with some uncertainty, "But he should not be dead. But I can't think of a reason why he can survive." At the moment of the attack, Li Tianlan did not see Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu, so the imitation sword could only be shot in the direction of the attack. But both of them saw Li Tianlan's state at that time. To say the least, even if the two of them did not observe clearly enough, the power of the sword was enough to explain the situation. Li Guangtu's eyes were a little cold and he sighed. He shook his head. "That sword," with a little fear and uncertainty he whispered, "How did he do it?" "I don't know." Jiang Shangyu shook his head again. "But the power of that sword is almost infinitely close to the eternal sword above Mormon's at that time. With Li Tianlan's current physical strength, his end is almost doomed after that sword. But I don't know why. I always feel that he is not dead." "Intuition?" Li Guangtu asked. "That's too mysterious." Jiang Shangyu shook his head. "I don't believe in this. I can't tell the answer. It's a little vague. But the more I think about it, the more I feel that he will not die. And I don't know if you have noticed anything. Jiang Shangyu quietly looked out of the window at Xingzhou. The sun was shining, the wind was blowing, the treetops were shaking, the flowers were swaying, and the water was clear. It was still the familiar world, incomparably beautiful, and it seemed unchanged. Jiang Shangyu shook his head slightly. The world in front of us. It seems that something we haven't noticed has changed. Or it's something we can't notice. Jiang Shangyu said softly and slowly turned around. Li Guangtu's eyes were fixed on him. At the moment when Jiang Shangyu turned around in a trance, Li Guangtu seemed to see a touch of incomparably mournful blood-red flash on Jiang Shangyu's body. Chapter 1047. What is that? Li Guangtu's eyes changed and he was a little confused. He looked at Jiang Shangyu carefully, only to find that everything about Jiang Shangyu had become normal, as if the blood-red color just now was just an illusion. But Li Guangtu couldn't help but feel a little panic in his heart. He couldn't tell why he had such a feeling. The scarlet color that disappeared after a hurried glance was so mournful, and could even be said to be ferocious. It instinctively gave people a very uneasy feeling. Jiang Shangyu slowly walked to the sofa and sat down. His movements were very, very slow. Are you okay? Li Guangtu took the initiative to ask. What can happen to me? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Guangtu in surprise and asked. Well, Li Guangtu looked at him thoughtfully and didn't speak. The uneasiness in his heart grew stronger and stronger, and it became stronger in the somewhat depressing hotel room. Jiang Shangyu sat on the sofa, leaning against the back of the chair with his body extremely stiff. He was quiet, silent, and motionless. He didn't move at all. Li Guangtu looked at him quietly. Jiang Shangyu, who was in this position, gave off an indescribable feeling of strangeness. The room was getting quieter and quieter and the atmosphere was constantly depressing. Jiang Shangyu just sat there. He looked very ordinary, but the more he looked at him, the more uncomfortable he felt. What's wrong? Li Guangtu frowned and thought. Jiang Shangyu, who was motionless, seemed to be thinking too. A fine layer of cold sweat came out of Li Guangtu's body. He had never been a timid person, but in this seemingly ordinary environment he felt that it was getting more and more terrifying. It was as if he was having a nightmare. There was clearly nothing in the nightmare and everything was very ordinary, but the great fear would always wake him up unconsciously. The room became quieter and quieter. It was so quiet that there was not even the sound of breathing. Breathing? Not even the sound of breathing? Li Guangtu suddenly raised his head and stared at Jiang Shangyu, who was sitting in an extremely strange posture. He finally knew what was wrong. Jiang Shangyu sat motionless. This feeling, it was as if he had placed a dead man on the sofa and had carefully arranged the posture for him. Without warning, Li Guangtu's scalp went numb. The room seemed to be getting quieter and quieter and the rapid heartbeat became clearer. Li Guangtu's breathing was a little disordered. He wanted to say something but he didn't know what to say. What's wrong? Jiang Shangyu, who had been silent as if he had been dead for a long time, slowly turned his head. He had only sat down for a few minutes, but it felt like he had been sitting for a long time. As he turned his head, his neck made a clear sound of bones rubbing against each other. I'm fine. Li Guangtu tried his best to remain calm, but his heart kept sinking. As Jiang Shangyu turned around, he saw Jiang Shangyu's face. That originally somewhat pale face now had an extremely distinct greenish-gray color. It was the greenish-gray color of a corpse that had been dead for a long time. In this state, Jiang Shangyu was really like a dead man. Jiang Shangyu did not respond. But he did not turn his head. His eyes were wide open, staring at Li Guangtu. He didn't speak nor did he move. He just looked at Li Guangtu quietly. Like a corpse turning its head, everything froze once again. Li Guangtu's whole body was covered by Jiang Shangyu's sight. He didn't speak or move. The bedroom was so quiet that it made people's hair stand on end. Today, this day, is really a heavy loss. Jiang Shangyu suddenly spoke. His head slowly turned around, his body stiffened against the chair and he muttered to himself. His breath was calm. His tone was really calm. It was calm without any ups and downs and even sounded extremely stiff and numb. Li Guangtu breathed a sigh of relief. The cold sweat had soaked his clothes and the sweat seeped into the wound. It was a little painful. He moved his body unnaturally and said in a dry voice, "The joint forces." He shook his head slightly. At this time he was not in the mood to think about the future. His eyes had been locked on Jiang Shangyu intentionally or unintentionally. He didn't know why, but he didn't want to stay with Zhang Shangyu like this for a second. Or he didn't want to stay in this room for a second. Think about yourself first. Zhang Shangyu continued to speak in that calm tone without any ups and downs. Think about the purgatory of heaven capital. Li Guangtu was stunned. All the ups and downs in his mind were pulled back in an instant. The purgatory of heaven capital. That was his everything. It was undoubtedly Li Guangtu's weakness. We appeared in Mount Dibing this time, and we even joined hands to sneak attack Li Tianlan just now, Zhang Shangyu said. If Li Tianlan didn't die, do you think he would let us go? Li Guangtu's mouth twitched and he felt a little embarrassed. He felt that he was offended by Zhang Shangyu and even felt a little ashamed. He was Li Guangtu. He was an expert and genius who used to be on par with Wang Tianzong, and even a step ahead of Wang Tianzong at some times. Zhang Shangyu and Li Tianlan were all juniors. Li Guangtu thought that his status was higher than these young people. His purgatory of heaven capital was also extremely powerful. When did he and his purgatory of heaven capital need to be let go by others? What I said is the truth. Zhang Shangyu said, my feeling tells me that Li Tianlan didn't die and his body won't even have any problems. Maybe it will be a blessing in disguise. I'm not optimistic about the collision between the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. The contrast between them is very obvious. The purgatory of heaven capital is not declining, but obviously, Samsara Palace has created opportunities for us to rise in East Island. But after the chaos in Snow Country, Emperor Dong's palace has lost some direction. It has been more than 2 years since the end of the chaos in Snow Country, and people in the purgatory of heaven capital have not seen a relatively clear future. But Emperor Dong's palace is different. It's not declining, but Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan are really like the sun at high noon. After the final battle in Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will definitely rise. In the Dark World in Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City can't stop it, nor can the Prince Group. Emperor Dong's palace will extend its hand to the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, set up a new group, and swallow up the vacancy left by the joint forces. Everyone knows what will happen. The embryonic form of a dynasty has become very clear. Zhang Shangyu talked more and more and his tone gradually became normal. The uneasy silence and calmness slowly dissipated. His stiff body on the sofa moved slightly and he continued to say, maybe there are some hidden cards, but it's meaningless in front of Emperor Dong's palace. The 12 super masters of Samsara Palace have suffered heavy losses, but the ones left are all experts. Saint is in the invincible realm, and military counselor is a top half-step invincible realm expert. Duke in general also appeared as well as horsewoman. The most important thing is flaming fire. Mochizuki Song is not dead, and she will also stand on the side of Emperor Dong's palace. Besides, Zhang Shangyu glanced at Li Guangtu and said, Situt Songyue? Obviously she betrayed us, or in other words she has long been out of our control. Although there are not many top assassins in Sai City, we have to be careful about each one of them. In addition, there are new rising experts in Emperor Dong's palace, such as Lin Yuxian and Li Beiyin. How many people in the purgatory of heaven capital dare to say that they can defeat them? Bai Yuming, Su Chu and Du Hanyin are also not mediocre. More than 2 years ago, Emperor Dong's palace took away a large number of graduates from the 2 academies. Now a considerable number of them have been stuck at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Perhaps most of them do not have the potential to enter the thunder-shocking realm. Even if a few of them break through the peak of the fire-flaming realm, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace will be greatly enhanced. And Zhang Shangyu's voice was a little erratic. The new batch of students from the 2 academies should be graduating soon, right? Look at what Li Tianlan has done during this time. In the Battle of the Desert, Xian Yuanfeng tore apart the Iron Legion with a sword and killed Gu Qianchuan with 1 strike. In Huating, Li Tianlan killed the invincible realm killer Ju with 1 strike. In Sai City he buried tens of thousands of elites of Snow Country with 1 strike. In Kunlun Mountain he easily injured Gu Xingyun. In Emperor Dong's palace I also lost the battle with him. In the final battle of Beihai he killed 2 martial arts Grand Masters of East Island in an instant. There is no doubt that he is the #1 person in the Dark World. After this year's graduation at least 60% of the students will choose to join Emperor Dong's palace. Do you know what this means? Li Guangtu did not speak. His face became more and more gloomy. The rise of Emperor Dong's palace is unstoppable. Next, they will completely enter an unimaginable explosive period. Compared with the purgatory of Heaven Capital, they can't compare with Li Tianlan in terms of top combat effectiveness. They can't compare with Li Tianlan in terms of wealth. They don't have a huge support force in Tianan, but the new group of Emperor Dong's palace can give Emperor Dong endless support. Jiang Shangyu smiled. He seemed to have completely returned to normal. So, we don't have to wait for Li Tianlan to free up his hands because he has now. The purgatory of Heaven Capital is doomed. Is this the conclusion? Li Guangtu's voice was extremely cold. This is not a conclusion, it's a fact. Jiang Shangyu said calmly. After a pause, he continued, do you want to hear my advice? Say it. Li Guangtu gritted his teeth. I'll join hands. Jiang Shangyu said. This time Li Tianlan didn't die and fell into a desperate situation. I may not have a good time, but the only good thing is that my foundation is not in Tianan, so I still have room to breathe. But this time the joint forces are destined to suffer heavy losses. After Emperor Dong's palace solved the purgatory of Heaven Capital, they will definitely sweep the whole dark world, occupy the territory and swallow up the interests. It's hard for me to escape. But if I join hands before Li Tianlan officially reaches the level of Wang Tianzong, we at least have room to resist. In this process we still have some hope if we look for opportunities. Li Guangtu pondered and did not speak. Ahem. Jiang Shangyu coughed violently without warning. He coughed so violently that snot, tears and even blood came out of his mouth, nose and eyes at the same time. Jiang Shangyu staggered up from the sofa, waved his hand at Li Guangtu and walked into the bathroom with a stiff body. The violent coughing lasted for a full 5 minutes before it stopped. Jiang Shangyu put his hands on the sink and breathed heavily. He looked at himself in the mirror. Tears, snot and blood were mixed together. It was an extremely pale face. But he was still alive. It was good to be alive. Jiang Shangyu smiled, bent down and turned on the faucet. When he bent down to wash his face and hair, did he ever think about what he was doing in the mirror? Was he bending down as well? Or perhaps they were watching silently without any sadness or joy, or with hostility, mockery or malicious killing intent. Did he feel a little panic at the moment he bent down? He could not see anything, so he would never know. The blood washed away the tears and blood. Jiang Shangyu exhaled slightly and opened his eyes. He did not have time to straighten up. There seemed to be something extremely sticky and soft on his arm. It was a strand of long black hair that was stuck together by a lot of blood. The long hair spread along his neck to his arm. In the mirror, blood kept gathering on Jiang Shangyu's shoulder. A woman's face with distorted features appeared quietly on his shoulder, looking at him from the mirror.